Good evening, members. Hope we're all well. And good evening to members of the public who may be watching online. My name is Councillor Steve Bartlett, and I'm the chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Board. And thank you for joining us this evening. So without further ado, I will ask Democratic Services Officer Claire to read out the housekeeping notice. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Please note that this meeting is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council's website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the car park at the front of the building. Finally, please could everyone ensure that background noise is kept to a minimum and that mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to a silent setting for the duration of the meeting. For those in the room, this includes turning off microphones and turning the volume down completely on laptops. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Claire. Agenda item 1, apologies.
We have apologies for this meeting from Councillor Broadhead, and he is being substituted by Councillor Wright.
Good evening, Councillor Wright. Is this your first one at this? Yeah, welcome. Thank you. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Members, does anybody have any pecuniary interests or any other interests they wish to declare? Nope. Okay. Right. Thank you. Thank you, members. Agenda item 4, public issues. Do you have any public issues, Claire?
No public issues, Chair.
Thank you. So agenda item 5, medium-term financial plan update. Okay, well, this is something that we monitor very closely in the Overview and Scrutiny Board. Without further ado, I think I'll invite Councillor Mike Cox, the Deputy Leader of the Council and Portfolio Holder for Finance, to introduce the MTFP paper for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is a fairly standard update report on the medium-term financial plan. And really, we're just asking the Cabinet to acknowledge the progress that we've made so far in terms of the 25-26 budget and medium-term financial plan. Obviously, we're asking them to endorse the latest position. I have to say, it's difficult. It is in some ways as to what the position is at the moment. It's not easy, but we are trying to make sure that we do set a legal budget for next year. We want the Cabinet to approve the implementation of a targeted voluntary redundancy process in order to deliver the savings, which we're going to have to make for the next year. So obviously, just to add in there, there's an awful lot of uncertainty at the moment as to what's going to happen, and we're hoping for some clarity on the 30th of October in view of the Chancellor's budget statement. I suspect we're not going to get an awful lot of clarity. We may get some nice words, but we won't know the detail probably until much later. And then obviously we want to note the update on the conversations with government on the impact of the DSG, which is, I think I've said before, is the elephant in the room, and for which we are absolutely reliant on achieving some success with government. And with, I have to say, some, not all, local MP support. We continue to express concern to the government about this existential challenge that we face. I mean, that's a summary of what the report says, I think.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Before we start, can I just thank Adam and his team for producing such a clear report, absolutely first-class report. So, members, we'll open this up for debate. Would anybody like to start? Councillor Trent, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I wonder whether the one area where there isn't unanimity amongst our local MPs is on the SEND funding, because I spoke to one of them and I raised the issue as a very serious concern and said that 4 of the local MPs were working together to try to get a better deal and to try to get something done about it. So so I suspect I know who's missing from that one. The one question I did want to raise, based really on what was mentioned by the portfolio holder, and that's targeted voluntary redundancy. I'm really hoping that it will be targeted as opposed to open voluntary redundancy, because one thing which is really becoming clear in recent times is we have a lack of people in the right place at the right time. I think the next overview and scrutiny board will be looking at one issue which has deteriorated over the last 12 months, and there are other areas where we do seem to be missing frontline staff, and I don't think we can let any more people who kind of answer phones and deal with the public directly. I don't think we can let any more go, because quite frankly, I think we're at the point where it could all go horribly wrong. And I heard something over the last day or so that sort of just really pointed out just how bad it can be for individuals and their circumstances. I'm certainly aware of issues myself where we aren't getting the response, or members of the public aren't getting the response which you would expect them to get, and we do have issues that the online portal isn't fully functional. um you know Again, I've had sort of people say, well, they tried this and it didn't work, and they went through another course. So I do think that we do have voluntary redundancies. It is targeted, and that there are some people that we really need to hang on to at this point in time.
Councillor Cox, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks, Tony. And it was targeted last time. We did not. There were certain areas where we did not accept any voluntary redundancies from. For example, social workers. That was definitely not a case where we would accept anybody in that category. So there were specific, and planners would probably be another one. So there were specific areas where we completely said no, we're not taking anything from that particular section. But what we probably are going to do this time, as opposed to last time, is to increase the payback period. I think we had a payback period last year of 2 years, where it had to be a payback period, and this year we may well flex that. And if it didn't pay back in 2 years, we wouldn't accept it. This time we may well increase that payback period to 3 years, just to sort of try and widen the net a little bit.
Yes, please, Councillor Trent.
We can come back because say there are areas where redundancies weren't encouraged, or voluntary redundancies weren't encouraged. It mentions planning. We've had a natural loss of people working in the planning department. So I think, and looking at it from a scrutiny point of view, which is what we're doing, we are in danger of removing some of our sort of face against things that are happening and so on. I really think we've actually got to focus very heavily on not losing anyone in any services, and possibly some people who may be thinking of going. I wonder if there's scope for redeployment and retraining in some areas, because I do think we are short in some of the essential areas of service of this council now. And I know that we're in a tough financial times, and that we've been left a very difficult situation, but what we don't want is for the actual level of service that is offered by BCP Council to fall flat on its face, because we've lost too many of the staff that we can't afford to lose. And often it's the people that are not necessarily the best paid, but are often the people that make the difference between us going and sort of functioning and not. So just really, I'm very worried about that area.
Yeah, did you want to come back, Councillor Cox?
Yeah, I just about to say, for very good reasons, they banned slavery a long time ago, so we can't actually force people to stay and work for us if they don't want to. But you know, I think one of the things that will hopefully make people stay a bit longer is actually we're going to hopefully, fingers crossed, that pay and reward will be successful and go through, and that will encourage people. We are losing people because of pay and reward because we haven't sorted it out yet. And that is one of the issues in terms of people leaving because they're just fed up of the person next door to them not being paid the same. So, you know, we are losing people for that very reason, in my opinion. And therefore, hopefully, if it goes ahead, that particular drain will be stopped.
Yeah, Councillor Trent, I actually agree with a lot of what you've just said. I'd just like to throw another element into that, and that is the transformation programme itself, which of course is designed to allow technology to replace staff. You know, that's what it's about, making a high-tech company. The interface with the council is through the online reporting portal. And I have raised this with the transformation group because I've used it a lot and I've been continually frustrated about the lack of progress with the client relationship management system. It is embryonic. It's been updated and improvements are being made. And we haven't got to the end of that journey yet. But from what I see in certain areas, I see each divisional reporting scheme is different. It's not standard throughout each reporting system. You get different feedbacks. You can no longer interrogate the reports that you actually made yourself. If it's decided your report is not valid, the record is actually removed, so you can't actually track what you've said and what it applied to. There are a lot of issues associated with the transformation program, particularly the client relationship management system, that leads to the sorts of frustration that you're describing, Councillor Trent. And I generally believe that is one of the major issues, and that's, you know, hence your comment, let's not get rid of people that answer the phones. But actually, the intent is to get rid of the people that answer the phones to a point, because we want the technology to work for the council. But if that's not working, then the frustration is going to build if there's a lot of people answering the phones. So it is a big issue. I agree. And I think the question is, what can we do about it from an overview and scrutiny perspective? And maybe we ought to be looking at putting that somewhere on our future work plan to investigate those particular aspects of it. You know, to identify where the problem areas are and what we might be able to do to recommend some kind of remedial action. Yes, please.
If I can just come back on that, because you've actually raised something quite interesting. If it wasn't for a person on the phone picking up that something was going wrong, you know, it was all, well, you know, it's your tech skills and this, that, and the other. And the person on the other end of the phone actually checked and did exactly what I was doing and found the same result. And I have suggested to various people, portfolio holders and people in IT and so on, that and going back years, different operating systems on different computers had a different experience with things, and this was something that was working for some people and not working for others. And this officer very helpfully checked it out himself and was able to confirm the problem that I had and report it to IT. So it wasn't just one person, but you know, if I'm sort of well, getting close to the truth, actually, some old biddy who's losing the plot sort of thing, trying to get in touch with the council urgently, then, you know, I would have just given up and not been served by the council, whereas I did have a second course of action. So, you know, it is something that does need looking at.
Yeah, I think your point's well made, Councillor Trent, and we need to think about what we can do for the future just to address it. So, Councillor BC, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got some questions on the report following through from what you and Councillor Trent have said, and I've also got some questions around the high needs budget. So I'll deal with, since we've been talking about them, I'll deal with first things first. So I just wanted to test what is actually happening over the voluntary redundancy, because it does say in the recommendations to develop an appropriate policy, and it doesn't actually say any more than that, nor does it give us a timescale for that. And I think the points made by Councillor Trent in particular are particularly precedent to that, because we do need to know that it isn't going to be the unintended consequences of voluntary redundancy, which can so often happen, and that it actually will deliver the savings, but it won't undermine the organisation. And so I just wanted to test what the formulation of that appropriate policy and how that will be developed. And in conjunction with that, actually what budget is being allocated to the cost head, or is it just being taken by services as savings, net of the costs? So I'd like to know whether that's centrally or whether that's service by service, and if so, what degree of both rigour and governance will be applied to that, so that we can actually be sure that what is intended is what actually happens financially. And I'll come back to the other one in a moment, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Richards, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And just to give you some reassurance regards to the voluntary redundancy scheme, we had a scheme in place for 2023, and what we're looking to do is implement a scheme for 2024. The 2024 scheme, the People and Culture team led by Sarah Dean will design that very much around the initial framework based on 2023 scheme, i.e. what we've implemented, plus all the learning that we got from that process. So actually making sure that we work out, it actually hits the objectives, it impacts in the areas that we want to impact, particularly taking in the point that Tony made around certain, targeted bits and pieces. So, it is a scheme that's going to be developed very much in line with what happened last year, but taking the learning from last year to make sure that it's improved as part of due process. With regards to the savings efficiencies, as the portfolio holder said, the purpose of this is to actually help unlock additional savings and efficiencies, so that actually the council can be given options as to which savings and efficiencies to then, to put forward and consider as part of the council report. All of those headcount reductions, if you like, are all part of the transformation programme. So within that transformation programme, we set aside some resources to deal with the reduction in the headcount, and those savings then form part of the transformation savings delivered, as a result of reducing the overall number of people employed by the council. So it links into that programme.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks to Mr. Richards for that. Just to go to your other point, Chairman, which was following again from Councillor Trent with regard to online reporting, which has a relevance, and it does need to be something this board looks at. I share your frustrations. I experience them on an almost daily basis, as do residents. I'm sure the same is true for others in this meeting. But I would like to be, if you like, contributing to how we improve that. So I don't want to do it in a public meeting. I think there is a role for overview and scrutiny in this process, and I think that role may be to have some sort of working group that can feed in to some conclusions which may improve it from the experience that both residents and members have on a regular basis. And I'd be very supportive of doing that, and I'd like to be involved in it, because I think that the bare bones are there, but it falls down so many times when you actually use it, in terms of how you do it, where you do it, and if you like, the default position. Sometimes you do need to speak to somebody, or you do need to contact the relevant officer, because it doesn't form a conclusion that's within the threshold of the things it allows you to report. So I'd be very, very supportive of that, Chairman. And if you want to take that forward, or you want to propose that we do that at some stage, I'm very happy to second it. my other question was around the high needs budget, SEND, and I've just wondered if I could just take you to paragraph 23, because there is a fair degree of urgency about this, and I appreciate that it's not in our control or in our hands at all. And I noticed the portfolio holder mentioned the budget on the 30th of October. It may or may not feature in that. I don't think any of us have any idea as to whether it does. But if it doesn't, following the meeting with officials from MHCLG on 21st of August, that leaves it open-ended, which I'm sure everybody shares the view is very unsatisfactory. But what it does talk about is the commissioning of a detailed review. And I wonder whether there are any timescales that we know about that, because it's all very well commissioning a review, which is what the department have done. It depends on the remit of that review and what happens with the conclusions afterwards. Is it just a smokescreen that the department has been seen to do something, it's at review, or actually do we think it's going to lead to something tangible that understands the depth of the problem and financially the implications for this authority? I've discussed these offline with the Director of Finance on several occasions, and I share his worry, as I'm sure we all do, but ultimately it's going to be a matter for government, Chairman.
I'm sure who wants to volunteer to take this on, Mr. Richards.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor BC, for the question, and thank you, Chair. So with regards to the remit of the review is being undertaken by somebody by the name of Chris West. Chris West is an advisor to the Department for Education. He is a seasoned Section 151 officer and a seasoned professional within the local government industry on financial matters. With regards to the timeline, since it was commissioned on the 21st of August, throughout September, what we saw was a little bit of that toing and froing, ebb and flow with regards to, can you provide me this, I need to understand that, all that sort of stuff. So we've gone through that process during the course of September, and my understanding is at the beginning of this week, that process had finalised, in the sense that we provided him with everything he required of us, and we clarified any further questions. So I think we're now in the process where he will be finalising his report and his advice back to DFE, and I await with bated breath with regards to their advice to me, because I think, as I've been clear, I need DFE, I need MHCLG, I need government, I need their advisors like SIPFA to give me advice on what advice I can give council on how you set a balanced budget for 25-26, because at the moment I'm in no man's land and I have not got a clue on how I can advise you until such time as I get that feedback.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'm grateful to Mr. Richards for explaining that, and it can't be explained too many times in my view. As I said earlier, I share his deep concern, almost despair, at the situation that we are in, and that the government do need to come back with something tangible, because it is impossible to set a balanced budget without that assurance. And I'm sure everybody in this board will do anything that they're asked to do to try and be supportive, but without the money we can't do anything tangible.
Thank you. I see Councillor Costin's coming. Before you come in, can I just ask you, whilst you're talking, that just to put this in perspective, not just for us but also for the public, if we could understand what the DSG grant actually is, and I know the report talks about we are now this year looking for £44 million in excess of that figure in year, and that, so even what we budgeted for is increasing beyond that. And I just think if people understood just how much money is being spent per annum on this area, put it in perspective for people.
So give you some numbers, because I like numbers. The net budget of the council is £357 million. So just remember, that's the net budget delivering all other services that this council delivers, £357 million. With regards to the high need budget in the DSG, the government give us £62.3 million in government grant. When we originally set the budget for this year, we were anticipating that we would overspend that budget by £28 million, and that was what was authorised by council in February. You would have picked up from the Q1 budget monitoring report, as updated by the report that's going to Cabinet on Wednesday of this week, that £28 million overspend has increased to £44.5 million. So you can see that in the context of a £62.3 million grant to start with, we're actually spending about 71% more than that grant on that service. And what that means is it feeds into the accumulated deficit. This deficit, the government had told us we need to stick into something called an unusable reserve. What that basically means is it's off balance sheet, sat over there somewhere in the stratosphere with everybody ignoring it. At the start of this financial year, that accumulated deficit was £63.5 million. At the end of this year, once you add on that 44.5, means it's up to £108 million. And then you can just start rolling forward. You can go to the 31st of March 2026, 27, 28. If it carries on at that rate, unless somebody somewhere does something. But that's not our issue, because at the moment, up until the 31st of March 2026, you can ignore it. You can leave it there in the stratosphere and pretend it doesn't exist. Our issue, and what I'm struggling to be able to advise you on, is how do I cash flow that in 25, 26? Because at the end of the day, somebody has to pay that bill. And I'm not allowed to borrow to finance that. If you had those kind of bills at home, you'd all reach for the credit card. But none of us, we're not allowed to do that in this instance. We're not allowed to borrow. So what we do...
Your credit card must be better than my credit card.
Yeah, well, yeah, relatively. But in this context, we still have to pay those bills. And if I can't borrow for it, then where am I funding the money? Now, I'm funding the money by, if you like, the headroom on our cash flow. People pay council tax day one. I don't spend that money until day 6, 7, or 8. That kind of difference between the two. The fact I have reserves and balances on the balance sheet, I have some cash-backed items. I'm using all that internal cash in almost to cash flow that difference. Our projections, and this is what we're having a conversation with DFE, MHCOG, and anybody who listened to me, is actually I run out of that headroom during the first quarter of 25, 26. So how can I advise you on setting a balanced budget when I run out of cash in order to fund that DSG deficit? And from my perspective, it's not about the service and what's right for parents, all that sort of stuff. That's a separate issue for me. It's all about how do I cash flow it, because I can. So somebody advise me how I can.
Councillor Cox, could you please advise Mr. Richards?
Oh, of course. I must say, no, obviously I share Adam's frustrations. But the point I was trying to make was that I also share Councillor Beesy's fear that this could be a smokescreen, and that actually this whole thing is to delay things, and then the report will just muddy the water for even further, and it'll carry on and carry on. There will come an end point is when we run out of cash, and when we run out of cash, given the rate of spend at the moment, that won't be very long away really, and at that point, quite rightly, Adam will need to issue a Section 114.
I think it's probably worth just mentioning as well, isn't it, that you mentioned the cost of cash flowing the excess.
Yeah, I think
which is, I understand it's about £5 million a year. So that's £5 million. If we didn't have to do more than £5 million a year, that we would have to spend on services, which we don't have because we're having to cash flow this particular cost. Is that right?
If you looked at the budget for 24-25 and we put in place £38 million worth of savings and efficiencies to balance that budget, then clearly you could have reduced that to £33 million if you hadn't had this issue and having to, fund it from using all of that internal cash, which otherwise was earning interest as part of that process. But looking at the scale of it, let's not lose, we've got £108 million deficit at the start of next year. That's the forecast. We have a net budget of £357 million. If you were to say, right, okay, well, the only way then is to reduce expenditure in order to deal with that 108 million, that's a third of your budget. The sheer scale of what would be needed would just defy belief. That's why I'm hoping the government provide us with that clarity and support in able to set a balanced budget for next year.
Thank you, Mr. Wishes.
I just add also that effectively the current scheme is completely and utterly unsustainable, and that there really does have to be a root and branch reform of the whole system, because local government, whether it's BCP or any other council, cannot carry on doing this, and they've got to change the way they do it.
Thank you. I think it's well understood by all of us. Councillor Aiken.
Yes, I have two questions on the same subjects, but the same similar subjects that we've already been talking about. My first one is on the voluntary redundancy. So I just wanted to ask, does this mean that we won't need to do, or we may not need to do any compulsory redundancies because we're doing the voluntary redundancies? So that's just quite a simple first question. I'll let you answer that one first.
Well, hopefully that's the idea, is that voluntary means that we don't have to do compulsories, but at the end of the day, depending on how many savings we need, we can't rule that out, because it may well be needed in certain areas. So.
Okay, thank you. Okay, my second question is about the cash flow problems and the budget and our discussions with government. So I've read in here that all our new MPs are on board with it, and I'm hearing from people around the room that there's one local MP who's not on board with it. And so I'm kind of working that out, that's not the one that's not new. And I would just really like to say that I believe that the government are under a lot of pressure. There's a lot of problems for them to solve at the moment. If we want our problem to be right up there at the top, it would be really useful to have all of our MPs speaking with one voice on this. Because across party, if you're saying something cross party, it is so much more powerful than if you're just saying it within your party. So if we've got all of our local MPs on it saying something needs to be done, I do believe that puts us just a little bit higher up on the pecking order than some place where maybe only the Labour MPs are saying something because we've got a Labour government. Any MP of any party can join in and say BCP needs this. So I'd really just I hope that you've had discussions with that other MP. Hope you haven't left him out just because he's not in the government. And if you've discussed it and he hasn't really been very supportive, maybe there are people in this room that can help by having a chat with him and getting him on board. Thank you.
Councillor Cox.
Let's not beat about the bush. We're talking about Sir Christopher Chubb here, so he has been consulted about this. He was directly consulted by the leader at the Air Festival, I believe, and I also spoke to him at the Air Festival. I've also emailed him separately, personally, asking him to get on board, and he does sound as though he understands the issue. And he was talking about asking questions in Parliament about it. I'm not aware that there's been any questions asked. But I did specifically ask him to, was he going to sign this letter, which all of the other MPs had signed, even though actually, to be honest, Vicky Slade was not keen on the letter that was drafted by the Labour MPs, but she signed it because she wanted to show some sort of solidarity. Unfortunately, Sir Christopher didn't, and I have sort of emailed him and asked him, but he's not responded to the last one. And so I can only ask my Conservative colleagues to put any pressure they can to get him on board, really. I'm not quite sure whether it's because it's a Labour letter or whatever. I don't think hopefully that wouldn't be the reason. We need to get everybody on board, as you said.
Maybe he could write his own letter.
I don't care who, I don't care what.
Let's all work together on
Just
this.
want him to write and support all of the MPs, and because this is I think an existential challenge for this council, and should the worst happen, then his residents will suffer just as much as every other resident in BCP. So it is very, very important.
Thank you. Councillor Beasley?
Thank you, Chairman. I've listened carefully, and I'm very disappointed that we haven't got support across the board. That has got to be rectified for the reasons that the Vice Chairman has set out. It is a much more powerful message. As Mr. Richards will know, prior to the general election, I was doing all I could, limited as it may have appeared, to try and get the attention across the piece with the then MPs. And I think some progress was made, but obviously not to a conclusion, or not to a satisfactory conclusion. If Councillor Cox could furnish me with the letter that went, so that I know actually what was said. Otherwise, I've got to rehearse it all myself from scratch, together with the separate one, which I think I understood he sent to Sir Christopher Chope. That would be very helpful, because either I or Councillor Broadhead can then put some pressure on to say, look, if you're not supportive, why are you not supportive of what has been said in these attachments? And we've got to find a way forward that will help all of our residents through making sure that this council remains solvent. And it is really critical that he understands that. So I'm happy to do as has been suggested. It would just save a lot of time, and it would be very helpful if I could have sight of those so that I can pin them into the email, if you like, so that it's all in one place.
Thank you, Councillor Beasley. Okay, I do have a couple of questions I need to ask. Well, one is an update, if possible. If it's not available, then so be it. But in the risks area of the report, it talks about Carter's Keep. I wondered if there's been any progress on that whatsoever. Bear in mind, there was a considerable down payment made against that project, and do we have any idea what the accumulated interest costs will be as a result of that advance payment? Thank you.
Chair, just to confirm, I don't think there's any further update from that as it's out in the report. And I haven't got that information on the specific detail of the interest costs that relates to that payment, either in the report or to available to be at this moment in time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Richards. There's a letter in the report which talks about a stakeholder representation. Presumably that was a representation from BCP to the new government, I guess. And there's a couple of interesting paragraphs in there. And one of them talks about the desire to allow the council to decide its own level of council tax. And the other one is about potential removal of a single person's allowance or discount on council tax. I just wondered, that letter, is that the administration's position on council tax? Does that reflect the administration's position on council tax, or is it just a general
I beg your pardon. I was looking for an email when you. Can you repeat the question?
Councillor Cox, yeah.
Can you repeat the question? Because I was just looking at an email.
Okay, there's a letter that I presume is to government, and it's called the stakeholder representation. It's on page 17 of the report, and the letter talks about the general approach to the setting of council tax, and it's advocating that the council be allowed to set its own level of council tax without any constraint from the government. The other issue was that there's some discussion about removal of the single person's council tax discount. Now, so the letter is a letter of representation to the government. Is that the administration's position? Is that what its aim is, or is it just a general discussion point?
I believe it's both. It's a general discussion point, and it's also the administration's review point. I mean, certainly, if we have made it clear before that if we could increase the council tax by more than the maximum, we would do so, because we would prefer to see additional services rather than having to make the cuts that we do. I think we've made it very clear that a few years ago, you'll remember that we this council did not have the maximum increase possible, and we forgave 2%, which we could really do with, and I think that we would look to reinstate that 2% if we could do, and so I don't think we've made previous noises and certainly previous statements before that that's what we would do, and certainly that's what we were looking for as part of this letter.
That's understood, but what this proposes to do is actually, because that decision was taken within a cap that was determined by government.
Yeah.
That was a decision, so it's a slightly different decision. Well, it looks as though if this is a decision where there is no cap, the preference would be there would be no cap levied by government. It would be entirely up to the council to set its own council tax, and this is what this is advocating.
Yeah, I think that we would prefer to be the masters of our own destiny, effectively, and spend the money as we feel appropriate that the council taxpayers want us to spend it on. They want to see their grass cut. They want to see their bins collected, just as much as we do. And if we haven't got the money to do that, we're going to have to stop doing some of it. And so I do think that we should be, and I don't want to set high rates of council tax more than anybody else does, but I would prefer not to make savage cuts to really important services, and so from the administration's perspective, that is our position. We would certainly not be going hell for leather and making silly increases, but we would do a responsible increase along the lines of what we feel as though was the minimum we could do, and that would be more than the minimum already set by government. So
thank you. And the single person's allowance and council tax, is that also?
I think that was just a rumour that was being spread around. I don't think we were responsible for that one.
Well, it's in the letter to government,
Yeah.
So it's more than a rumour.
We're reacting to it.
So I think the answer is, within the documentation, and so this document is a response to the government's call for representations that will feed into the October Chancellor's budget. That's what they called for, and as Councillor Cox has set out, a lot of the administration's potential issues that you wanted to make representation and demonstrated within this document. With regards to council tax discounts, I think it was just a general plea for greater freedom and flexibility, which is a constant theme that this council has referred to over time, to be allowed to determine some of those things locally rather than to be imposed upon us by government.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Councillor.
Right.
What's your surname?
Right.
Right, thank you.
Right. Yeah, can I just clarify that? Is it this administration's wish to get rid of the single person's discount?
No. Can I say that that's different from if we had the ability to do so, whether we would or not is a different matter.
Mr. Richard, could I clarify? It's my information as much as anything on the application of one-off resources, which is given in Appendix B on page 30. It talks about £4 million to support regeneration. Now, is that a contribution, or is that the total cost of that particular element? And also, is that using all of that surplus that's held in the business account? And if it is is that another cost that we incur because we don't have it in our treasury management surplus any longer? If that makes any sense at all.
Just to give you some assurance with regards to the figure you're referring to, figure 3 in Appendix B, that refers to the £25.281 million that in setting the budget for 24-25, we identified that we had this surplus in the business rate collection fund, and we set out very clearly within that document how would we be applying those resources. So when council set its budget in February of this year, it agreed a £1 million contribution per annum for the next 4 years to support its regeneration ambitions. Now, and that was all laid out, and that hasn't changed since that position was agreed by council. So nothing's changed in that regard. With regards to the schedule, it clearly sets out how those amounts are being applied. And in general, there's not been too much change. I think the only change is a slight switch of resources because I think, as we previously discussed, not all the resources for contingency are currently being applied through Q1 budget monitoring. So that was able to, put additional resources into balancing the MTFP. So, but other than that, it's all in line with, what was agreed by February Council.
So is that sort of being treated a bit like a reserve? And if it is, there is a cost to using that money because it's no longer in the bank, is it? You're using it to fund other things.
Yeah, ultimately, a lot of the resources that aren't used during the course of this year, because in this year you take it from the collection fund and move it into your account, that's not used at the end of the year will then move into an unearmarked reserve. And what we've discussed is with all of these, a lot of them where you're not applying those resources, you have cash back because it's cash in the collection fund, which at this moment in time is helping us with that SEND issue with regards to the treasury management and cash flow.
Understood. Thank you. Okay, I think we probably done that one to death. So an interesting debate for sure. And of course, when you talk about the numbers about the DSG grant and the issues there, almost everything passes into insignificance, doesn't it? Against that issue alone. Well, all I can say is wish you well with it. Yeah, Councillor Trent.
Yeah, if I can say on the DSG grant and the various issues around that, one of the groups, or the main group that was campaigning against the oh God, I forget what it was called, but it was earlier on this year to do with the education money, and they didn't want us to go into a certain scheme. But one of the bits of information they supplied, I thought was very useful, and it's one that I've shared with anyone who would listen, would help, is the amounts of money involved in tidying up the system are actually quite modest. And this was before the last budget, and they were talking about the last national budget, they were talking about £10 billion available to spend, and they ended up spending about 13 billion. But about just over 2 billion of it would have cleared the debt for the 49% of the councils that were in serious trouble because of it. And 4 billion or 4.5 billion would have actually have funded the situation. It would have repaired the system quite well. That was half of what was given away in the last budget before the general election. And I think if we could get that point across, because if those figures are correct, that's actually quite a modest amount of money that a government can put into a system to get it working properly. And I just, that is so. And obviously, I'm not clever enough to understand exactly how these things work, but that is a modest way of sorting out what is the biggest problem facing half or more than half of the local councils in this country. And it's just a message we need to get across, because that is a very powerful message. And I'm very grateful to the organisation to provide it with us in a handout when we were debating it at council earlier on this year.
Mr. Richards, thank you.
Sure, if it helps, I've recently seen two figures in this regard. The first figure was, I think, quoted on Politics South for the weekend, because they had an item on SE&D deficits, and I think they quoted a figure of £5 billion nationally is the current size of the deficit. Another figure I have is the estimate at the end of this financial year, which you can argue whether or not it is detail behind it, but the estimate was that by the end of this financial year, we're looking at a figure of more like £6 billion as the accumulated deficit across all local authorities that is currently sat off balance sheet and being totally ignored.
Thank you.
So the figure we were provided was an underestimate, but it's still a realistic sum for one element of it, which is the debt. But obviously the system's got to be sorted out anyway, and also the legal bits and pieces behind it, which makes the system so pressurised against councils.
Thank you, Councillor Trent. Okay, as I said, we draw this to a close. I just want to make sure that, there's a raft of recommendations to Cabinet going there tomorrow. Does anybody have any problem with what's going forward? Or are there any recommendations anybody would make other than what's in there? If not, I report to Cabinet that we're content with these recommendations. I personally don't have any issue with them, but if anybody does. Okay, I see no indicator, so I'll report that to Cabinet tomorrow that we're content with those recommendations. So now item 6, Directorate budget presentations. Now this year we're going a slightly different route after some complaining last year that not everybody was given the opportunity to have a really good go and understand the budget. Starting very early this year, overview and scrutiny have been brought in very early, and we have a plan now to improve members' engagement. Sorry. Excuse me. But to introduce the paper, we have Lindsay Marshall, our Democratic Services lead, actually, for ONS online, who's going to introduce this item for us. Thank you. You there, Lindsay?
I'm here. Thank you, Chair. I think you have mentioned what I was going to say, really, which is that this is a part of a wider programme of scrutiny and whole member engagement in developing the 25-26 budget. We've had presentations delivered to the other 3 ONS committees now. You are the last committee to consider these. You've got 3 directorates that report into your committee, so a little more complicated for your committee. But just to say that following this item, you have a working group scoping report coming up, during which we'll be asking you to think of some key lines of inquiry that you would like to look at in depth, some critical areas that you can look at to help contribute to the development of the upcoming budget. So just to bear that in mind when you are listening to these, because this section is about giving you a really good understanding of where the budget is now for each directorate, so that you can identify those areas. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay. So first, Adam Richards, Chief Financial Officer, is going to give us the resources presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And just to confirm, this is a budget awareness session on the Resources Directorate. This is a presentation that would have been given last week by the Chief Exec in his capacity as the Corporate Director for Resources, but clearly he's unavailable this evening, so you have the pleasure of me instead. So with regards to this budget awareness session, as has been outlined, this is part of the process of enhanced member engagement and scrutiny of the budget, and a lot of that comes through the work of this committee and the chair to improve those scrutiny arrangements as part of the process of setting a balanced budget in February of every year. So it is a springboard for an overview and scrutiny committee working group, and I think one working group is being set up per overview and scrutiny committee. That working group is being asked to focus on a maximum of 3 budget areas within the remit of the committee, and will be supported by the relevant director, corporate director or service director of the area being scrutinised. The aim will be to assist councillors understanding the pressures within the budget, the policies with regards to the services delivery in selected areas of the budget, and so that they can have that opportunity to provide effective test and challenge of the options as a critical friend and to provide their views. When the papers were issued to members, areas potentially suggested were the transformation budget, ICT licensing costs, legal locum costs, or the climate change and ecological emergency budget. That's just, those were the areas that were potentially put forward suggestions. But I think, as Lindsay said, it really is down to members of the committee as to the areas that they would like to further scrutinise as part of that process. So, looking at the Resources Directorate, an overview is that generally it consists of 6 areas. It consists of IT and programmes, which is under the Service Director, Sarah Chamberlain. My area, finance, you have law and governance from Janie Berry. You have people and culture from Sarah Dean, marketing and communications from Isla Rennell, and the Chief Exec, Graham Barron, takes account of the executive. Just to be clear, a lot of my colleagues, unfortunately, because of the timing tonight and the deferral, couldn't be in the room with you, but most of those other service directors are online as a phone a friend, should you ask me any detailed questions. So, with regards to the actual resources budget, so just to highlight that the net budget for resources is just under £39 million. Generally, in the rank order would be 29% of that is spent on IT and programmes, 27% on your finance services, 12% on law and governance, 9% on people and culture, 6% on marketing and comms and policy, and 2% on the executive. What I've left out of that list is the fact that 10% of the budget is paid or it relates to insurance premiums, and that's the insurance premiums for the whole authority. So no matter what service, no matter what policy, it's all charged in as part of this budget. And it also includes 5% of it relates to ICT licenses, which again relate to those licenses that are paid across the authority. We, as part of that process of the new F&O system, are giving consideration as to whether they should be part of this directorate or whether or not they should be held centrally. But that's an ongoing conversation that we have internally as to the best way to show some of these costs moving forward. So that's your net budget, and that's the service. As an example, as the sort of services that are delivered within those areas, and I won't go through the whole list because you can see them, but for example, IT and programs, you've got the IT infrastructure, you've got the data and analytics team, and you've got a governance and compliance service. Within law and governance, you've got democratic services, you've got legal services, you've got electoral registration, you've got land charges, and you've got the registrar service. Between marketing and comms, you've got corporate communications, commercial marketing, policy, sustainability and inclusion, including climate change, and the research and consultation team. So you've got quite a wide breadth of different teams within each of those directorates that form part of that budget, that is accumulated for this area. So looking at the income and expenditure for the area, and I'm going to focus predominantly on the expenditure side. You'll see that of the £48.3 million total expenditure for the area, you'll see that over 70% of that is spent on employee costs, which is probably not a surprise to you. You then have about 9% spent on premises cost. That principally is those insurance premiums. You then have a 19%, £9 million spent on supplies and services. But again, principally that's the IT licenses that are making up that pie chart. If we took a stance where we took out the premises and we took out, sorry, the insurance premiums and we took out the licensing costs, then probably around about 80, in excess of 80% would be spent on staffing in delivery of the service. So that's principally, it's about people being employed in delivery of the service. So having a look at that broad framework that lies behind the budget, if we then turn ourselves to, first of all, the 24-25 budget, but then we then look at the 25-26 budget and the medium-term financial plan. So that's what we covered in the next few slides. So in this slide, we reflect on the Q1 budget monitoring report that was considered in detail by this committee on the 27th of August. As part of that report, you had the position for the Resource Directorate, which indicated that we were looking and projecting to overspend by just under 2%, 1.9%, and in total about 0.8 of a million pounds. You can see from this that most significantly is within law and governance. You do have pressures within marketing and comms, and then to a lesser extent, you have some pressures around your people and culture budget. But if we looked at the detail of that budget and those issues, the pressure on law and governments is to do with the fact that they need to employ locums. They are really struggling with regards to fulfilling their establishment, but the work is still there and they need to get in agency locums to actually cover and provide those services. The in-year pressure on marketing and comms and policy is to do with an income budget that was included. And at this moment in time, the forecast is that they don't think they'll achieve it in full. Within people and culture, we had this situation when we set the budget, we set ourselves a target for converting established posts into apprentices. And what we did is we set that target at £67,000 as a saving, and we associated that with people and culture. The issue is when people have employed those apprentices, because they have done, the service had taken that saving, so it's been delivered by services as opposed to that central bit. And we just need that tidying up bit to be done as part of some future process. They've also taken on the workforce development team from Adults and Children's Services. And when they took it on partway through the year, that service that they were given were forecasting a small overspend of £40,000. To be clear, with that Q1 budget monitoring, the whole process, that Cabinet were very clear in their expectation of corporate directors and service directors is that they will implement mitigation strategies to address those emerging issues so that they are contained and managed in 24-25, and then also they don't then cause a problem going forward into future years. But that is a direction that Cabinet set on Q1. We will see the Q2 report, which will flow through to Cabinet in November, and I have no doubts that this committee will want to look at the detail of that, once it's been established after end of September. So as I said, if we then, having looked at 24-25, start to look at the period after 24-25, 25-26 onwards. And this is an extract of the MTFP summary that includes in most of those MTFP update reports, where it identifies that for resources, you've got some pressures in each of the next 3 years that amount to about 1.1 million. And what you also have is you have assumed savings of £1.4 million over that 3-year period. So generally, you'd expect almost the cash position on that directorate to be static almost over that 3-year period, because you're generating slightly more savings than you are those additional pressures. But what we'll do now is next slides aim to look at that in a little bit more detail. So the detail of the resources position is you can see there are a couple of drivers of that pressure over the 3-year period. The first driver is inflation. We have inflation on a number of contracts, whether that's within IT on, say, those licensing contracts, whether that's in marketing, or whether that's in people and culture associated with various pieces of software. Those contracts will probably relate to contract clauses that then mean that they go up every year. And what we've done within the medium-term financial plan is make some provision for those costs. The other issues contained within that growth is you have a pressure in regards to land charges income, because I think it's recognised following the 23-24 outturn that actually we probably won't achieve the level of income because the market isn't as buoyant as we previously assumed. You've got investments in the new committee management system and the new payroll system that over that 3-year period we need to set aside resources for. And what you've also got is a recognition that when we went through the transformation process and the target operating model, what it made clear to us is we need to invest in our people and culture team. And what you've got is a recognition of the need to do that as part of those pressures that are factored into the medium-term financial plan. So just picking up on some of those key themes, clearly what happens to the pay award will be quite significant in regards to the overall costs of the resources directorate. And as stated, it also feeds into that calculation of members' allowances. We have some income challenges, whether that's the housing market impact on land charges or the advertising income that we generate through comms, through the comms team. We have clearly a watch on what's happening with inflation, because that's likely to drive a number of those contracts. And we have a need to invest in software, whether that's the new committee system or whether that's the new payroll system. But besides those growths, so having looked at the growth, the attention then turns to what's included within the medium-term financial plan for savings. And there are 2 segments to this. The first segment is what we call service-based savings, generally run-of-the-mill savings that we've managed to identify through day-to-day activity. And then what you have is the transformation savings. With regards to the service-based savings, you can see over the 3-year medium-term financial plan, we're assuming just over £800,000. Some of that is due to the fact that the pay award and other costs you would expect to impact on some of the recharges that we put through the process. So whether that's recharge to board companies, whether that's a recharge to also adult learning, or whether that's a recharge to the HRA. On top of that, you have a recognition that we expect to get some savings from that voluntary redundancy process that are factored into this equation. You then have a recognition that we would expect to put up our fees and charges, and that would generate additional resources. But then you have some specifics. So a specific is we are looking to establish a concessionaire on Creekmore Park and Ride. That is likely to generate around about £67,000. Based on they're going to consider setting up a paddle courts activity centre for temporary use on that car park until its long-term future has been determined. In addition to that, Isla and her team are looking at generating additional income from street operations, working very closely with her operation colleagues. And then one that we've got in here is a potential saving, but it was a saving 24-25 that we didn't eventually take. So the option there is to take it again, but we might go through that same process again, is that when we set the 24-25 budget, we originally considered not taking out terrorism insurance in regards to some of our buildings. Eventually we did, because at the last minute we got some government funding, and as part of that, that was one of the savings that we decided, no, we will row back from that as part of the final budget process. It's in there as a place marker for 25-26. Clearly, we can go through, as we go through that budget, have a similar kind of conversation when we get to February of next year. So having looked at the service-based savings and what they generally relate to, the other area is your transformation savings. And the transformation savings for 25-26, all of them relate to revenues and benefits, because the first element is probably in around about 20 days or so, we are moving from 2 systems to 1 system. So the team is at a really critical stage, high levels of stress, because they're looking to move to 1 system. Because previously, Bournemouth had 1 system, and Christchurch and Poole, which were part of the Stour Valley Revenues and Benefits Partnership, had a different system. And what we've done is we're going to put them all onto the 1 system for BCP. You know, that contract, we've been through that process. We saved one of those licensing fees, which is about £159,000 a year going forward. And you know, hopefully within the next 30 days or so, we will achieve that as a successful outcome. But a huge amount of stress and work for the team in achieving that outcome. Connected to that is that actually at the moment you've got a team supporting those 2 systems. In future, you need a team just to support 1 system. And as part of the transformation target operating model, we've been through a process that identifies that we can potentially reduce staffing in the revenue and benefits area, and that can deliver £371,000, and I'd say as a minimum for 25-26. That will rely on a significant restructure of that staff, and we're in the middle of that process, just about to launch the formal consultation from next year, so that we can then deliver it for the 1st of April from next year onwards. But you know, really critical stage for the team as part of that transformation agenda. So looking at some of those key themes, you know, I think it's a constant review of all fees and charges, looking at ways of potentially reducing reliance on agency workers, particularly those locums and legal and services, and whether or not things like labour market supplements can be used to try and attract staff and retain staff within BCP. Ongoing challenging ourselves about those recharges to make sure they remain fit for purpose and in line with the costs that we're incurring. Look at those staffing structures and consider any compulsory or VR opportunities, and in that, make sure that when we are setting out those structures, we're doing so in line with the target operating models principles about things like spans of control, numbers of reports, etc. Ongoing, keep reviewing any non-statutory services, and always looking for modern, efficient ways of delivering our services and undertaking all related activity. So next steps. Now, the next step is I'm probably going to pass over to Glyn, who's going to add in a few slides for those areas. Although they're not part of the resources directorate, they don't belong to any of those other overview and scrutiny committees, and therefore somebody needs to take ownership of them, and he's going to, you know, just present those to you in a minute. But generally, you know, it's going to be a request to review and reflect on the information that I provided, consider ideas with regards to those in-depth budget scrutinies during the course of October, establish those working group, those task and finish groups, identify potentially up to 3 issues. Then hopefully during October, those meetings can take place. And then on the 18th of November, when we meet, we can receive the feedback, not just from this Overview and Scrutiny Committee's working group, but from all the others as well, with regards to any advice, guidance to Cabinet as part of the process of setting that balanced budget for 25-26. On that basis, Chair, I'm going to stop talking and see if there's any questions.
Members? Okay, okay, Councillor Trent, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that you know is there to sort of talk about in the budget review group is the residence card system, and it strikes me that would some of the potential savings in revenue and benefits actually be used to administer that, because it is based on people paying their council tax locally, I think is a general idea. And it would seem to be something which it would be great to get it off the ground, but revenue and benefits staff seem to be the most qualified people to actually operate that system. I don't know what the thoughts are on that.
Mr. Richards.
I think my thought would be I remain to be convinced about that. But as part of the financial strategy that Cabinet endorsed way back in July to support the development of a 25-26 budget, then one of those themes, one of those areas for further review was the resident card. And I do know that there is work being undertaken with regards to the shape and form of that as part of that work in developing the budget for 25-26.
Thanks. As you touched on that, I mean, would that then fall into non-statutory services? I mean, can you give me some flavour for what you consider to be review of non-statutory services within the Resources Directorate?
Well, I think it's quite difficult because clearly a lot of the resources stuff we do things that are of a statutory nature. So if I took financial services, for example, we prepare the statutory accounts. You have to have a statutory set of accounts, and we have to go through that process. We have to engage with the auditor. We have to pay the auditor fee. But associated with that, you have a financial management team and a financial management system, and clearly you can always challenge around whether or not we're getting the best use and efficiency from those and look to those efficiencies as part of your budget setting process. So just to take you back, when we set the budget for 24-25, it included £175,000 saving from accountancy because of the fact that we'd engaged with a new target operating model. We'd reorganised ourselves around that target operating model, hopefully improved our efficiencies and the ways of working, and that delivered that saving. So it's just a general theme about the areas that people should be challenging themselves around, I think.
Yeah, I understand. I think, what is non-statutory and statutory is an interesting thing for members because non-statutory services are things that are likely to be cut or reduced or whatever. And within the Resources Directorate, I find it difficult to picture what those areas actually would be. And you mentioned it, so I thought, well, I'd better ask you about it because difficult to see where those areas would be. Probably easier within operations and environmental services, I guess. So, members, do we have any further? Yes, Councillor Waters.
Regarding the IT licensing costs, are there any situations where we've got duplicate solutions, not necessarily because we've got Poole, Bournemouth, Christchurch, but let's say, for example, we've got a Microsoft license that has a certain number of pieces of software within it. You pay for them whether or not you use them. Do we have any solutions in-house that we're currently using that we could use within our Microsoft licensing instead to save us some money?
Chair, I think at this point, this is where I phone a friend and I asked Sarah if she would potentially come in and try to answer that question.
Hi there, Sarah Chamberlain, Director of IT and Programmes. Thank you for your question. Yes, we have lots of systems and housekeeping process internally. We use a system which we carry out on an automated basis, which tells us, one, whether licenses are actively being used, and if they're not, then we take those away and move those on to active users that we can use them. And in terms of licenses that we aren't paying for, we would always absolutely buy the very minimum. And we have a roadmap of licensing and our approach to the Microsoft licensing estate that we then plan out strategically to address that. But would be happy to talk in more detail if required.
Thank you. I have to say, when you were presenting the numbers, the IT numbers really stand out, don't they? It's a huge expense. Whether you can influence that too much within the budget, I don't know, or analysis of it. And that's where it's going to be difficult for the working group to find something to focus on, because whilst there may be a huge amount of expenditure or cost in one particular area, it doesn't mean to say that's where you can actually achieve some reductions. It might be in the smaller areas, and you would maybe want to look at, but maybe that's where the low-hanging fruit is rather than IT. But so it's difficult. It's a really difficult thing. Okay. Any more? Councillor Dedman, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Richards mentioned Stour Valley, Revson Ben's crowd. I just want to say that I was in at the start of that. I think they did a wonderful job. They have continued their wonderful job, and I wish the transfer every success. I hope it works out well. It was always Dorset, Poole and Christchurch. Bournemouth stood aloof, and now we're all in together. So that's a good thing in a way. But no, they did a very good job in the years that they were going.
Chair, if I may just respond, I totally agree with the councillor. Just like Councillor Deadman, I was there at the beginning in establishing that partnership, and clearly it was a disappointment to me personally and for the staff involved that Dorset decided to withdraw from that partnership. But we are where we are, trying to make the best of the position and bringing all of the services for BCP together under one system, under one coherent team is the right way forward.
Okay, members, if we've no further questions for Mr. Richards, we'll ask Glyn. Sorry, I forgot your name. Yeah, Glyn Barton, Chief Operations Officer. Thank you very much, Glyn.
Thank you, Chair. So evening, as the Chair said, I'm Glyn Barton, I'm Chief Operations Officer. I'm accompanied by Chantal Crovers, who's the Finance Business Partner for Operations. And like Adam, I've got a few photo friends on the line as well, because we cover quite a wide variety of things in operations. We had to leave and recut this presentation quickly before the start, just to make sure that we were only covering the parts of operations that this committee covers. Now, that means that where, for instance, in commercial operations, you might expect to see a long list of things, there's only a short list, similarly in environment, etc. So we've cut this presentation down, hopefully, to just those areas that this committee covers. So operations, just to remind everybody, hopefully Chantel's driving.
Yeah, I'm trying. Sorry.
There we go. Includes a number of areas. So we have environment under Kate Langdown, commercial operations under Amanda Barry, customer and property under Matty Rossip, planning and transport under Wendy Lane, investment and development under Amina Matin, and operations, strategy and partnerships, including our economic development functions under Chris Shepherd. So we come to the budget for 24-25. I think it's worth saying a few things here. Firstly, operations generates a significant amount of income, so over 114 million pounds worth of income. But we are also a cost to the council, and that's principally because of those statutory services that we talked about that we absolutely have to provide, and we don't have control over the type of amount of money that costs. So things like our waste management, for instance, 17 million pound there, but no control over that. It's around the number of residents that we have, etc. But we do have a significant savings target that we are absolutely on track to achieve in 24-25. So that equates to around about 23% of the current net budget for operations. Our current projections, and we're very confident that of the 14 million pounds worth of savings that we're scheduled to achieve this year, we will achieve 13,936,000 pounds worth of those. Where have we driven those savings from? Things like harmonisation of beach hut fees and licensing charges, the reduction in leisure centre subsidies, restructuring of the directorate, looking at how we generate more income, increasing our fees and charges as well across the piece. So looking at where we're going to end this year, and this is just Q1, so we haven't been through the busy summer period, which this function relies on significantly, particularly in our commercial area through our seafront revenue generation activities, our parking, etc. And what I've asked my directors to do at this point of the year is really get everything out on the table, everything they're concerned about, so that we can start to manage it in year. So what we're looking at here really, we think, is around about our worst case outturn for the year, and we'll hope to manage that down during the course of 24-25. So we are looking, in terms of that cost to the council, we're looking at about a 2.8 million projected overspend at the moment. That's principally being driven by two aspects there. Firstly, parking services and our fees and charges around parking services. And then secondly, it's around the seasonal income and is not quite hitting where we thought we were going to in Q1. So that's our projected outturn. As I say, we're managing that in year. We then come on to the MTFP pressures. These are those things that we're projecting to increase over the coming 3 financial years. You'll see that you've got within there split down by each of our areas. So in commercial operations, for instance, as you'd expect, inflation is a big piece there. We've got to invest in our beach huts to make sure that they continue to bring in the income that we need from them. We have inflationary increases in our utilities and cleaning. We've got to invest in our ICT systems on the seafront to make sure we keep bringing in the income there. And we have contract inflation as well. So things like the RNLI contract, for instance, we've got contract inflation there. On the environment side, we've got a few, we've got the natural burial site, which actually is a reversal of a pressure there. But we've got a coroner's accommodation, which is bringing a pressure in year in 25-26. On the infrastructure side, we've got Twin Sales Bridge, where we know the problems with that. The team have done a fantastic job of getting that open again. There are further bearing replacement works that need to take place, and the team are factoring those in. We have seen inflation in terms of the supplies that we need there as well. We don't have street lighting and energy inflation around street lighting. And then in customer and arts, again, we have increasing energy pressure, principally around our properties there. And then there's some financial type of work around the PFI, which Matty can talk to if you need the explanation around that. And we have the Pool Museum, the impact of the capital scheme there. We also have some one-off pressures in operations. So funding of the Air Festival, the Upton Country Park full cost recovery, Highcliffe full cost recovery, and our Christmas event. So hopefully we'll see those starting to reverse as well. We've then in customer arts and property, we've got the Russell Coates Museum and the move to that away from the council, and just making sure that's in the right place to enable it to transition smoothly as it moves forward. We do have savings within the MTFP over the next 3 financial years, which we're absolutely looking to deliver. We do have some uncertainty around some of those savings. So, for instance, the reduction in the subsidy of the leisure centres in 25-26. We know we're going to get there. It just might take us slightly longer to get there than we had planned. We have brought 3 new leisure centres in-house today as part of the BCP leisure brand, and you'll start seeing the branding appear on those leisure centres from this evening. So we're working through those savings and also looking if we can't achieve these savings, where else can we go in terms of income generation to help us manage our budget in coming years. So what are the key themes? Well, obviously, this budget is significantly affected by seasonality and weather. Q2, we had some very hot weekends, but we also had quite a lot of wet weather as well. I will be getting the Q2 figures shortly, and we'll see where we are from those. We have contract inflation, particularly around our parking transactions. We have inflation linked to pay and also materials. Our income is rising, but our costs are increasing faster. And we also obviously have the financial uncertainty around the October budget and how that impacts our negotiations on a lot of our smaller contracts. So what are our opportunities? Additional income generating opportunities. We're looking across operations to see where we might be able to generate additional income, either by doing things more efficiently, more cost effectively, or in new ways and new areas that we can exploit. We're continuing to look for bids, to bid for grants to achieve our service ambitions. We're looking to accurately align our capital recharges. We're reviewing our fees and charges. Have we absolutely exhausted that? We need to look at our business model as well. We're continuing to reduce agency workers, looking where we can at staffing and restructure opportunities, reviewing our non-statutory services, and looking at how we can harmonise our systems to get greater efficiency. That's where we are in operations.
Yeah, thank you very much. Members? Councillor Dedman.
Yes, on that last one, harmonising the systems. Which systems? I thought we'd done all that. We've been doing this for many, many years.
And I think we have done a lot of the harmonisation. I'm not sure we've necessarily landed the benefits from all of that harmonisation yet, and that's what we want to do. We want to exploit the benefits of that harmonisation.
Okay, I'll just come in with one. This year there's been a sort of a, I beg your pardon. Oh, yeah, okay. This year there's been a very strict cost control mechanism put in place. It's still in place as far as I'm aware. How instrumental has that been in the achievement of your savings? Or has it played any role in that? And if it has, does that mean that we're going to carry on with the, you know, the difficulty in providing services that we have this year, which have been quite noticeable to the public in certain areas? So is this the new normal if this budget is to be taken forward?
So there is a part of this which is around the savings that have been achieved by the strict cost controls. Absolutely. What we're conscious of, though, and you know, going forward, we really need to look at is making sure that our asset base keeps itself in a position where it can be maintained, and we don't go past the point of degradation. So that's a conversation that is a live conversation at the moment around how we make sure that we keep our asset base in a maintainable position.
And can I ask how much of that, if you can provide any sort of answer to it, relates to non-statutory services? Does this mean that we may have to dispose, or yes, not carry out some services we're currently performing, and we may not be able to in the future?
I think coming in fresh to this, I think we are close to statutory levels on a lot of our services anyway. I'm not sure we'd want to go below where we are at the moment. And that, I think, you know, for my type of 4 months here is my initial answer on that, but I need to get into it in a little bit more detail to really fully answer that question.
Councillor Trent, thank you.
Yeah, though I think the issue with income from parking is skewed a little bit by the absolutely appalling weather we had up to about June. There is this worrying lack of expected income on the parking charges increase, and I wonder whether that is going to be a factor going forward, and that strangely enough a residence might be one way of compensating. You know, if people can pay a little bit less if they're local residents, then it may encourage more people to use it. It may increase income, but that's just but the thing I'm sort of interested in is talk about the cost of servicing the parking, and I'm assuming it's these people that provide parking apps, and I wonder how much that does actually cost the external people who provide parking apps. And I think there has to be a multiple of them because, you know, not everyone has the same app. And how much, if anything, we've lost to the rip-offs of the QR code that was going on. You know, people putting up fake codes, and that money's got to have gone somewhere. And I'm wondering whether that has actually lost us any money. That's a couple of points about the parking side that worry me, that, you know, we need to think carefully about what we do on that.
So yeah, I think like, it's all really good points. I think on the QR codes, what I would say is actually the teams across the council in my team in Gillian's team have been really good at capturing those early and getting them removed. I think we are in a position where I can't give you an answer on the exact cost of that at the moment because A, I'm not sure we'll ever really know, and B, it was in Q2 principally that we saw those and not Q1. What I would say around the overall parking picture, the costs of the apps, etc. That's a live discussion with the portfolio holder at the moment, Councillor Herriot, and also we've brought in a new parking strategy manager who is really looking at this afresh, and we've taken a clean view on that parking strategy.
Councillor Cox, thank you.
I think I mentioned this to Glyn before, but I think anything like that should be an investigation into the charges that the banks and the credit card companies charge, because actually they do tend to be probably, to use your expression, Tony, a bit of a rip-off merchants in terms of what they charge, because their charges can vary hugely, and therefore we need to make sure we get the absolute best value we can, because I suspect we're not.
Sure. Yeah, Councillor Wade. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I would just like to suggest that it would be a good idea to make some money out of these leisure centres that we've just acquired. What you have with Everyone Active, a lot of people will go for the multi-site membership, so being able to use say the Dolphin is sort of quite attractive, and I mentioned this in ONS 13th of May that it used to cost £1. It now costs like £2.40 or something because there's a minimum 2-hour parking, and it was okay, yeah, that was an anomaly because it was sort of classed as being town centre when really it's leisure centre adjacent and should be treated as such, and we're still in this position where we're probably not going to see the income drop until people's annual memberships, things like that, come up for renewal. But it's like cutting off your nose to spite your face. You make a little bit off of parking charges, but then you lose it in the leisure centre revenue. And not only that, we want people using the leisure centres. So back in May, Vicky was saying that she had referred this to Amanda Barry and Graham. He was in the room with her, and yet it's still a problem. So I'm going to keep banging on about it until it's not.
Okay, thank you, Claire.
Yeah, we're aware of the issue that you've raised, and it has been raised in other areas as well around the parking, particularly at the Dolphin, and that is something that we're looking at and we're engaged actively with Councillor Herriot on presently. But I do agree with you around the BCP leisure brand and the bringing together of the leisure centres. I think it really is an attractive offer and something we can really start making a lot of.
Would you, sorry, so if it's okay if I just follow up, would you be open to say letting people just put in their codes, sorry, to put in their, what's it called, your registration number at reception, similar to say like when you use a restaurant, and then it's not going to be parking that's abused for people who are who are using it as town centre parking or work or things like that, where fine, makes money out of those people, but for leisure centre use, how are we looking at that? Just either have it on your membership or to sort of sign in at reception with your car reg.
Yeah, we're looking at all options. I'm not sure I want to work through the solution here particularly, but yeah, we're working through what we might be able to do, and we'll certainly make sure that that's worked through the relevant portfolio holder.
Yeah.
Thank you, Claire. Councillor Aikenhead.
Yes, I just wondered if we could have a little bit more information on the PFI contracts that were mentioned.
Yeah, certainly. Matty, did you want to come in on those?
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. Good evening, members. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily an expert in the PFI. It's a very complicated financial arrangement which involves credits from the government as well as payments that we make in relation to it. But and there are finance colleagues on the call that may be closer to some of those reserve transactions. But essentially, we are paying over a long period of time for the PFI building. Eventually will come into our ownership, but at the moment there is a deficit in the reserve that will help pay those payments, and that's why we're putting more money in to make sure that there is enough in that reserve to pay those ongoing payments until the expiry of the PFI in about 8 or 9 years.
Okay, thank you. That's something we're all looking forward to, I think, Matthew. Councillor Salmon.
Thank you, Chair. So I right at the beginning of your presentation, Glyn, you just mentioned about commercial ops and the fact that this board doesn't have oversight of everything. Can I just get a bit more detail about what we do and don't have oversight of in terms of that area? Thanks.
Yeah, that's something that I'm trying to get absolute clarity on myself, to tell the truth. So what I think we'll do, just working with you guys, will send out a list of everything that's covered by each committee, and I think save me trying to ad-lib it here is probably a better way of doing it.
Just to say, with the agenda, every agenda that goes out for ONS board, we do include the terms of reference for the board, which includes a breakdown of the areas for each of the committee. So it doesn't go further than that, but yeah, if that's a guide. But
I think the leisure centres are now going to be under commercial ops. Yeah, it's quite a big chunk of business, I think. Okay. Any more members? Oh, Lisa, thank you.
I just wondered if you could explain the pressure on the coroner's accommodation, please.
Yeah, I could, but Matty is online and is probably much better at doing that than me again. He's just disappeared from the screen.
Sorry, in relation to the financial pressures, are you referring to?
Yeah, it was just on the very first slide, I think. It just said pressures on coroner's accommodation, I believe, and then it had 200. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Well, and Kate is on the call. May be able to explain that slightly better than I do, because I'm dealing with the accommodation requirements for the coroner going forward, not the existing budget. So I'm not sure whether Kate knows what are the origins of that 200,000.
Hello, everybody. Kate Langdown, Director. Yes, thank you, Chair. Kate Langdown, Director for Environment. We are just double checking this one, but I believe this one will actually be removed as a pressure for next year. It is part of the work Matty's team are doing around future coroner accommodation options, is as much as I believe at this stage, but we are just clarifying that. So it is likely to be removed as an immediate pressure.
That's Mr. Richards wants to come in on this one. Thank you.
Yeah, I might be able to help in the sense that I have a suspicion that 210,000 relates to the fact that when we went through the asset and accommodation work stream and set up, if you like, improve this building, there was a recognition that we actually also would look to provide new facilities associated with the coroner's service. So I think that money might be, the big might be here, might be in relation to recognising that we might need to change the location of the coroners, that might need capital investment, and we might need to borrow to finance that capital investment. That's what that might be relating to. But it was a recognition of that original overall approach, I think. It's sort of work in the consolidation of all of our accommodation buildings into this building.
That's Devon.
Yes, sorry to come back again. It's just a comment about the RNLI situation. It's just occurred to me, coming from the far-flung end of the conurbation that we are losing our lifeguards in Highcliffe. And my comment is that I'm disappointed. I know the RNLI are a sacred, sacred cow, and they do brilliant work, but I was horrified to find how much they cost. And also, we're not having them at Highcliffe because they've been cut, which is fair enough because it's very low risk beach, touch wood. But also at Muddyford and Avon Beach, which is where I live, they come at 10 and they go at 6. And I just want to point out that whatever we're paying, I do hope we're getting good service, because it does seem the service seems to be less and less. I'm sure they used to be there much longer when my children were there. They'd be there in the evening. Now they pack up at 6 and off they go. And I'm not quite sure what the costs involved are and how we're saving.
So I can absolutely assure you, having seen some of the stats from the ONLI and on rescues this year, that we are getting very good value from them in terms of what they provide for the community and visitors. I think in terms of locations and hours of use, it's all done on a risk basis and assessed each year. And obviously it's an ongoing contract negotiation for next year and ongoing years as well.
Okay, members, I think we. Oh, sorry. Yeah, please.
Just going back to something that was said on the parking, there seems to be something slightly distasteful about some reasoning that someone going to a gym at the Dolphin can get a discount on their car parking, but someone going shopping, bearing in mind we want to encourage people to go to our town centres and high streets, wouldn't. It just seems that everybody should, you shouldn't discriminate on just because they're going to the gym and someone else is going shopping. Seems everybody should pay the same.
Thank you, Councillor Beasley.
Thank you, Chairman. I should preface this by perhaps declaring an interest that I'm a member of the Arts Council Southwest Board, but I don't think I've been anything more than just that declaration. But I noted the points being made about the transfer of the Russell Coates, and I wonder if you could give a reassurance that everything is still on track as far as that's concerned, because it's really beneficial both to the council and the museum and art gallery itself, and that hasn't as a result been watered down in any way, because I think the equation from everything I've read and heard is that it is all quite finely balanced as far as them taking on that responsibility and the risks that they will then be taking for the longer term.
So my understanding at the moment is everything from our perspective is on track. There are obviously aspects that need third parties, particularly the government, etc., to make sure that the transfer happens. But from our perspective, and I'll look at Matty to nod here, everything is on track from our perspective.
Yeah, just to comment on that, the aim was to do the transfer by October 25. Work is still progressing with that date in mind, although as Glyn has said, there is a parliamentary process that has to be gone through to affect the change. But at the moment, we have no reason to believe we won't make the October 25 deadline. That's what the team are working to.
All right, members, unless there are any more points, we'll close that part of the presentation. Thank you very much, Glenn, and thank you, Adam, for your presentations. I think, you've put a lot of information. Oh, is she going to give a presentation? Oh, beg your pardon. Sorry, I've missed a trick here. Kelly Dean, Director of Housing and Communities, is going to give a presentation.
Thank you, Councillor Butler.
Sorry, fancy forgetting you. My goodness, I am in trouble.
Thank you.
Sorry, please go ahead.
You know me, I don't like to be left out. So I'm going to give a presentation that does follow a similar format to that which Adam and Glyn have given, but this focuses on housing and communities as a service as opposed to a whole directorate. And obviously housing and communities forms part of the Wellbeing Directorate. Now, my presentation does look at the whole of the budget across housing and communities, but I will pick out key points because housing and community services essentially sit across two different overview and scrutiny committees. And I think there's some members in the room who have already heard me do this from a housing perspective in environment and place, and we have agreed an area to focus on around bed and breakfast and temporary accommodation. So for the purposes of this evening, my presentation within the scope of this committee will be focused around community safety and engagement, which encompasses services like community development, the work that we do with our voluntary and community sector, volunteering opportunities, lots of community initiatives, community resilience, our household support fund is held there, and then our community safety partnership. We lead on all of the council's response. There are counter-terrorism aspects to that, and then management of community assets like community centres and making sure that they work and have good standards, and that we support the community groups who typically run those services. And then public protection, which essentially is regulatory services in safer communities. Regulatory services is environmental health, trading standards, and environmental protection as well, which includes things like noise, nuisance, pollution, envirocrime, those sorts of areas. And then licensing of HMOs and private sector housing standards, licensing of caravan parks, all fits within our private sector housing team. And then we have our community safety accredited officers, our CSAS team, antisocial behaviour team, and the statutory licensing function as well. So for the purposes of this slide gives the context of the Housing and Communities Directorate, but what we're focusing on are the dark blue boxes. So this is the whole housing and communities budget. So gross expenditure of 29.3 million, and you can see 6.2 of that there highlighted to show the areas around community engagement and safety and public protection that form the basis of the focus for the committee this evening. And then net expenditure of 8.9 million and a 3.8 net position there for the same services. Income shown across the piece. You've got a really significant reliance in terms of service fees and charges across all of our services across housing and communities, and also government grants. So an area of potential risk. There is a considerable number, if you look at that 33% of our whole budget, and a big reliance in the services in scope around government grants. Expenditure is pretty much focused around, obviously, as you would expect, employees, and also third-party transfers and payments. Really relates to a lot of the commissioning activity that happens across the whole of housing and communities. I will say the majority of what you see there in terms of that 12.8 million is in relation to the housing side, but there is quite a chunk there around the communities side, particularly in relation to things like our community safety activity. So this is our current 24-25 projected outturn, small projected overspend. That is as a result of some delayed savings from the savings that we needed to achieve this financial year. I'll explain that in a little bit more detail. Contractual notice periods is essentially what sent us over the edge there in terms of a slight overspend. But we do think that actually there's an opportunity to mitigate that through expenditure control and some salary, some vacancy position that we have within those service areas. In terms of other pressures, I'll ignore the others in relation to housing, but we do have a challenge at the moment. There are a couple of different cases where we have some judicial, and it's quite difficult for us to, until we obviously know what the outcome of those are, both to understand the position in relation to our potential exposure to legal fees, but also any costs if those judicial reviews are successful that could be awarded against the council. This is our summary position for the MTFP for 25 to 28. You can see that there are some service pressures, which I'll briefly describe, and then some savings and efficiencies that are already mainly the savings are that have been identified are those that will carry over in terms of full year effect into 25-26. So our pressures, we have a small amount of pressure in relation to community engagement and safety, which was relating to a one-off. It's essentially a reversal of a previous saving. And the other one, just to note here for the purposes of the scope of this committee, is the public protection CCTV contract pressures. So we had a considerable amount of additional cost that we needed to take account of in terms of our CCTV contract pressures and inflationary increases through the year. And CCTV is one of those items that we are looking at constantly in terms of how we can reduce those pressures. So these are our service-based savings. Adam mentioned this earlier. There are service-based savings and then transformation-based savings. I am pleased to report that we have achieved all of our savings in housing and communities, and they come through a mixture of staffing reductions, and for the purposes of the services in scope, particularly if you take public protection, we are working very much to a statutory minimum now. So we are core statutory functions only, with a couple of exceptions, which I'll note later on. We've increased any recharges, any fees and charges. We've rebased our budgets, and we've increased our income to deliver additional savings. From a transformation perspective, there are also you can see that there are some other staff savings there. And again, that's supporting that move to a statutory position. And then some other elements there in relation to non-essential expenditure and some reductions in grant funding. So these are the items highlighted that we might want to consider in terms of our MTFP pressures, CCTV contract that I've already mentioned. And this is an item which is something that we discuss often. CCTV comes as a benefit to not just the council, but also obviously to organisations like the police. We've had conversations with the police and the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner in relation to discussions for and pursuing a position where they might support financially. Those are ongoing discussions that we're having. But a really big challenge and risk for us in this area is around the removal and reduction of grants. We've got considerable areas where we're waiting for announcements from the new government in relation to what the support will look like going forward. There's a heavy reliance on, particularly in the community safety space, around grants for funding of staff. And that would really put pressure on our base budgets because some of that is related to statutory duties, and it would have a big impact on our commissioning activity. So as I said, we are working in the areas that are in scope. We are working to a statutory minimum in the majority of services, but the exceptions are CCTV. It's not a statutory service. CSAS is also not statutory, and community development are not statutory services. But there are choices, obviously, in all of this to be made, and there's a very clear direction in terms of wanting to make sure that we support those services going forward. That said, we're always in the business of obviously looking at how we can deliver all of our services more efficiently. There are some areas that you'll see there in terms of opportunities to support increased debt recovery, which I dare say, if we can make some savings on the housing side, there could be some opportunities for us to work more efficiently across the whole directorate's budget. But essentially, unless we look at reducing non-statutory services and stopping non-statutory services, really we're in the business of looking at systems and our working practices to pursue more efficient ways of working as the only real way that we can achieve any other savings in this service area. So I think that's me, and I will pass back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Beasley, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. I would like to ask Ms Dean, particularly around community safety, around grants and CCTV. I know, and I'm sure there are others here who also work with you around these issues, perhaps quite often with the police. And we know that to do the job properly, there is growing demand, there's growing need for more CCTV in really legitimate locations to make sure that community safety is not compromised and that criminals can be observed and apprehended. So obviously there is huge support for what you're proposing in terms of funding from the police, if you can get some, from their very restricted budgets. But I did wonder how much direct lobbying of government and perhaps lobbying of our 5 local MPs is taking place, so that the point can be really made that BCP has some special issues that perhaps don't apply across the whole of the country, and that perhaps any funding that's available could therefore be considered for prioritisation here, because you and I and others well know that those problems are really growing in certain areas of BCP Council, and unless we get a grip on them, they will get away from us. And this is one way of trying to rein it in.
Thank you, Councillor Beasley. I think, yes, absolutely, the conversation is being had. We've had some really positive discussions with our MPs, our new MPs, and I think from my perspective, really positive to be asked directly the question, you know, how can we help and what will make, what will make the difference in terms of the challenges locally. So community safety, Councillor Beasley, as you would absolutely expect, is one of those issues that I have raised, and the plight of community safety as a sector in terms of how this heavy reliance on government grant is really critically important. There's lots of discussion and lots of anticipation around changes in government policy and emphasis around things like antisocial behaviour and how we manage out crime and disorder, and that impacts not on what resources the council receives, but other partners as well, like probation and the police. So it really does need to be looked at in that sort of broader picture. I couldn't agree with you more. CCTV is a huge deterrent. It's really important in terms of making people ensuring that people feel safe in their communities, but also that we are there to detect and prevent crime and disorder. One thing that we have to be careful of always is making sure that we have a balance. And I think we're now at that stage where wherever we invest in new cameras, and often we get government grant, and we've had that recently, to support, that does have an impact in terms of our contract monitoring and the requirements of that in terms of making sure we can really effectively use that CCTV. So there is a need to balance that, and there is a need to have a conversation about how we make sure that we are working collectively as a partnership, and how we work as good partners supporting a valuable asset across us and other public agencies. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much. It does.
Councillor Aikenhead.
Yes, I was just wondering, in terms of the CCTV contract, is there anything that we contract out that could be brought in-house so that we'd have more control over the costs?
Thank you. We have looked at this before, and the conclusion that we have reached is that it is far more cost effective to contract out the CCTV service. The amount of monitoring hours that we receive is considerable, but again, I think it's one of those things that you have to keep under review as things change and as things move. There are still staff involved within my service who directly support CCTV, but the monitoring of the CCTV is undertaken by a contractor. So I think it's a position that we need to always make sure that we have right. But certainly that it's a relatively large contract, but having re-tendered it recently, I think we can be confident of the value that for money that we're achieving there.
Thank you. All members. Okay, Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chairman. Perhaps I ought to declare an interest, as I'm a member of the Police and Crime Panel, and one of the issues that they have with funding, and I think it affects us quite a bit, is that there isn't an allowance in the funding system for seasonality. And during the summer season, when we've obviously got lots of pressures on the beach and so on, resources get moved around, not just police resources, but council resources as well, from some of our estates, for example, and our open spaces near our residential areas, to look after Sandbanks, Bournemouth Beach, and so on. And I'm wondering whether that's an area of representation that could or should be made, because, as I say, the funding formula, there are other silly things about the funding formula that affect rural areas, but that's another issue, because there's something to do with how many pubs you've got per square mile and things like that. It gets totally crazy. But the seasonality bit, particularly as we are an area that's under huge pressure, during the peak season. And I wonder whether that's a point that we need to perhaps make a little bit of noise about with the right people at the right time, because, it does affect our community safety aspect, because the resources we have are more stretched.
Can you come back on that, Kelly?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Trent. Yeah, seasonality is a big issue, isn't it? As you say, and we're quite a unique place, and I think we have to consider the challenges of BCP being very different to the challenges of Dorset, and yet the funding formulas are certainly for the police are determined on a Dorset-wide model. I know that the Police and Crime Commissioner lobbies on this on a regular basis. I think that's something that we should support. I think that there are decisions that will be made about new programmes of funding and new initiatives coming from the government and through the Home Office, which we need to be very clear about in terms of understanding that in the context of Dorset, BCP is a very different area, largely urban area, different challenges. Even if you took something like, say, for example, domestic abuse, our position in relation to our needs around domestic abuse looks very different to that position in Dorset. So there are some real baseline issues there in terms of the kind of demographics and the geography and how the funding formula works. Absolutely, the seasonality means that we have all of the issues and the challenges to manage of of a large urban area, with then the added challenges of the seasonality and an incredibly busy visitor economy, which, as members in the room will know, we work incredibly hard. My team work with Glyn's team to make sure that we manage that as effectively as possible. The police work incredibly hard, but the reality is that is a tricky situation for us. Police and Crime Commissioner is lobbying, and I think it's important that that's something that we are involved with through the conversations with our MPs as well.
Thank you. Kelly, could I just ask you a question on deposit bond or deposit bad debts? What's the extent of that? Can you put a number on it?
Not right at this moment. And strictly speaking, Councillor Bartlett, that falls outside of the remit of this committee, but I would be more than happy to provide you with some information. Now, you can imagine our rent deposit position goes back over a number of years, and we have policies in relation to how we treat the bad debt provision. So we have to put it in that context, but I would certainly be happy to share the info.
Thanks. I think anything financial comes within this board's responsibility, actually, Kelly.
Fair enough. All right. Okay.
Okay. Thanks. Okay. Well, that's the only question I've got. Is anybody else? Okay. Thank you, Kelly. Thanks very much. Thanks. So, members, we've come to the end of that debate. We've been given an awful lot of information tonight. And I mean, I could hardly read some of it. It was so small, even with my glasses. So, it's going to take a lot of poring over those presentations to actually pick out the bits that may be of interest. But I think we were given some clues, actually, by the presenters. So I think we're probably going to carry on to an extent. then in our next discussion. So we'll close this agenda item and move on to the next one, which is the ONS Budget Working Group Scoping Report. I'm gonna not steal Lindsay's thunder. She's on the line. Lindsay, do you want to introduce this item, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this very much follows on from the last one, and we've already touched on the ask for this item. This is an opportunity to establish a working group, and as we've said, all the ONS committees have been given that opportunity, and the other 3 committees have taken that up. The working group is set out in the report, and you're asked to fill in the gaps around membership and particularly the key lines of inquiry. Just to stress that each working group needs to complete its work in order to report into the November ONS board meeting. So really you have the month of October to get through some work. And we are estimating 2 working group meetings per committee. So that's about 4 hours of targeted working group scrutiny that you can lend your test and challenge as a critical friend to the development of the 25-26 budget. So it's really going to be a case of selecting those most critical areas that you think you could dive into in a short, sharp working group to assist in that budget development. Just to give you a flavour of what the other committees are doing, the Children's Services Committee is looking at school transport costs and the care growth forecast. So they've only selected 2 areas to focus in on. The Health Committee has selected 1 area, which is the adult social care demand management. And in Environment and Place, they're going to look at climate and ecological emergency budget and the budget associated with reaching net zero. And they will also look at the costs relating to B&Bs and the travel through temporary accommodation. So the other 3 committees have really honed in on some particular areas, and I would just urge this committee to do the same really in what you select. So with that, I'll let you reflect on what jumped out at you from the previous presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. So I think the first thing we need to do is think about the working group itself. And can I just introduce the item here? And then, you know, talk about volunteers. Well, one is, do we want to do it? That's the first thing. Do we want to do this? Anybody not want to think we shouldn't be doing it? Okay, looks like we all want to do this. Okay, so that's the first point. Yeah, Councillor Trent, fine.
Yes, I do think that we all ought to do it. And in the example list under point 13, the middle 3, I think, all relate to each other. The resident card, the fees and charges, and income forecast. As I said earlier on, there has been a sort of a cause and effect in fees and charges, and we don't know till we're certain of what the Q2 is like as to how badly it's affected it. But I do think that exploring the resident card idea and linking it to those other 2 points, income forecasts and fees and charges, might be a way forward. And you know, it would give something very useful to look into that would hopefully benefit residents, but also sort of, you know, get a sense of reality about what's happening, because it was raised at the last overview and scrutiny meeting about the effects of charges and so on, and the disappointment in income from it. I think, you know, there are good reasons for that, but I do think that perhaps if we discuss those and make that a point to look at, I think that would be a very useful way forward.
Thank you, Councillor Trent. Before we get on to that, I'd just like to talk about the committee itself and who's going to be members of it. We do have some volunteers. Councillor Salmon has volunteered, Councillor Beasley, subject to availability on dates and things. And we've also had an offer from Councillor Waite this evening as well. That's three members. And the paper is asking us to decide who's going to lead that, but at the moment, I think I'd rather leave that for various reasons for that working group to decide for themselves outside of this meeting who's going to lead it. Sorry, did you want to join it as well, Councillor Trent? It would be great. Yeah. You've obviously got some good ideas by the sound of it. That would be great. So we've actually got 4 volunteers, which is wonderful. Councillor Waite is shaking her head violently. I mean, would you like to come in, Councillor Waite? Have I misinterpreted your lovely email that I received this evening?
Well, I offered, and then Lindsay said that the work really needs to get done over the month of October, and I'm kind of booked up really until the 25th of October. And yeah, sorry to be impatient. I just thought I'd get your attention before you locked me in as the 4th person, because I don't think it's going to work with my calendar, unfortunately.
I am so sad and devastated, actually.
Chair, I'm
Yes.
happy to join the working group.
Excellent. Okay,
If
that's brilliant. Well, I think we do. I think yes, we do. That'd be brilliant. So we do have 4 volunteers, but thank you, Claire. Anyway, never mind. So that's good. Excellent. Having decided that, now the dates. Well, who's going to be the lead officer, by the way? Will that be you, Claire, or who will be the lead officer, Lindsay? It depends. Okay.
Yeah, Chair, it depends on which areas you select for scrutiny, and then it would be the relevant budget holder.
I was talking about a democratic support officer, or won't there be one?
Within the team, we will offer democratic services support. That will be divided out across the team. Okay,
all right, thank you. All right, so when you, I obviously misunderstood the paper. I thought the idea was to decide who the support officer team would be, but what you're saying is that other officers from various directorates will actually be members of the working group itself, depending on what we're selecting. Is that right?
Chair, what I'm saying is, in general, in any working group, we will select a lead member and then a lead officer to give strategic support to the working group. The lead officer will be the relevant budget holder, director, for which area you decide you need to scrutinise. There will be democratic services support from this, but I'm not expecting a huge output from the working group in terms of minutes or etc. It's very much about bringing your views back into that ONS board meeting along with your other ONS colleagues.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so members, that some suggestions have been made in the paper as what areas we ought to sort of focus on, but it's entirely up to us. And it might be that you're not ready to actually decide what we need to focus on. And frankly, with the presentation we've had, it's all sorts of thoughts in my mind as to whether we're even in a position at the moment, although these suggestions are very useful. But it may be that members have got other ideas about the areas that we need to focus on. Councillor Trent has mentioned one. Councillor Salmon.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask a probably very basic question. One of the items on that list is income forecast, and my understanding is that we're talking about essentially commercial operations where, places where we as an authority make money off stuff. Is that right? Am I reading that line on that list correctly?
Well, income forecast includes everything. In my mind, it's everything. But I don't know, Lindsay, do you know the background to that suggestion? Oh, sorry, Mr. Richards.
Yeah, what I'm conscious of is that that's a huge beast, income forecast across the council. Doing something in October, it'll probably take you to next October to draw it all together to actually give you something coherent on that. What we need to be clear about what is within the actual terms of reference of this committee, and now I'll look to my democratic services colleagues to say, what is it that's within the remit of the overview and scrutiny board based on those fragments of the different presentations you've received to date and tonight, because I'm not quite sure I fully understand what's within the remit of this committee.
Yeah, I mean, I'm slightly amiss as well. For example, the transformation budget, and essentially the main transformation program has come to an end. And okay, there is an ongoing transformation program, but it's relatively small compared with what we have done previously. And how significant that is, I'm not really sure. I think, yeah, fees and charges, licensing costs. I really don't know. I mean, I leave it to members.
Something. Can
Yeah.
I just? Could we have some explanation from the officers, just a little brief kind of little bit on each one of those as to what you actually mean by it and why you've included it as something that we might want to look at?
I'm not sure that officer, can you, sorry, oh, Lindsay, thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Aitkenhead, I didn't catch the very start of what you said because your microphone was off, but I think you're asking about the list within the report. An explanation, yeah. I would actually defer back to Adam around that because I know those suggestions originated from him. But if I can just help in terms of what you might select and just say that, for example, in health, where they have gone for demand management, and we've done a bit of scoping work since that meeting, we have indeed, found that that's a huge area to look at just in and of itself, and indeed the same does apply for fees and charges, and so in order to add value, because that is the point of this process and have some impact on this developing budget, I would urge you to look at some areas that are perhaps a little more contained. But in terms of an explanation, I don't know if Adam can help with that.
Mr. Richards?
Chair, because clearly it's interesting how these suggestions do come forward, but clearly, we've heard from Glenn tonight around the resident card, and I think as part of that conversation, we had discussions around how it links to income and fees and charges. I think actually, if you're going to pick up the recommendation from Councillor Trent, and it might be that you wrap that up and say, well, okay, can we look at how they're all related as part of that conversation, rather than treating them as individual items. I know, the other areas we did reference were the transformation budget, because it still is a significant budget for 24-25. We do have transformation budgets leading into 5-6, but they are specific to children's and adults in the main. You've clearly got the ICT licensing costs, and I think, as Lindsay said, from those presentations, are there any specific issues that you're concerned about and cited on? I think the one that we will reference was clearly the legal locum costs, and I understand from what I've just heard is that the climate change and ecological emergency is already being looked at by one of those other committees as part of that process. So it's all of that overlap is sometimes quite hard to see the wood for the trees.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, Councillor Northover.
Thanks. Thank you. I wonder if we could look at agency costs and maybe also locum costs, because it's something that comes up forever. And we always say we're going to look at, and I think, well, we must surely have done everything already, but we never really have a good sort of proper discussion or deep dive on it. And I think it would be really good to understand if this is something that we're expecting to make savings on. Is it realistic? What we're whatever our ideas are this year, are they realistic?
Yeah, because those sort of costs are spread across all the directorates as well, and all the different services. So, and it's not a function that's sort of centralised, is it? Within resources, because they just look after their own staff. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got a suggestion that we've all. I think it's a perfectly good thought. That we allow the 4 members of the working group to reflect on these, and then for them to actually say what it is they would rather do. You know, it may be that they take these and they seem very reasonable suggestions, to be honest, but that might be, there may be other areas that you feel are more pressing, and I don't think we have time here to discuss those. I mean, it's difficult enough picking out, you know, all that information for those very detailed presentations that we've just been given, and I don't know. That would be my view anyway. Let the committee actually decide on what it is they want to do, unless anyone's got any. I mean, if you take Councillor Beasley, just for example, he's got huge expertise. He presented 12 budgets to over the years. He's got massive experience, you know, and I'm sure he can help. Sorry. Hello, Lindsay. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. Chair, I just wanted to highlight that officers from across the council are pulling these working groups together at some pace, responding to what the ONS committees are asking to look at. We are drawing up more detailed key lines of inquiry based on the topics that have been selected in the other committees, but what we're finding is there is a very limited amount of time for officers to bring the information together for these group meetings, which we're obviously having to slot into the diary quickly. We always knew this would be the case, but it was planned this way so that you could engage in this time period when you can have some influence. You can delegate to your working group for them to determine what they want to look at, but without a steer from the committee, there is a risk that those working group meetings will not be able to have the information before them, or have enough time to gather the information to do justice to whatever you want to look at. So personally, as a scrutiny officer, I would be saying don't set up a working group if you haven't got an area that you want to actually look at. It seems to be the wrong way around. I'm happy for you to delegate to your working group. I do have to do it with the caveat that it may be difficult to bring a good amount of information to you to do those issues justice.
Okay, well, my suggestion would be we do actually accept these recommendations, but on the caveat that if there's anything else that members wanted to address, then that they could do that as well. But Councillor Aikenhead.
Yes, I think that if you leave it to the working group to finalise what the remit is, we might actually need an extra meeting, because that will be the priority for the first meeting. Once we've decided what we want to look into, then the officers will need to go and find the information. So if we are to do that, we'll need to meet very quickly and get on with that. I think it would be sensible for us not just to be sent away to do it from what we've got so far, but maybe for us to say that we'll pick something out of either the points that are here or the ones that have been raised in the committee today. So for instance, the agency and locum costs, which is a great idea. I think we should add to the list, but not do everything, just pick things from that list. And I think I would also like to add something to the list, because I think that because although I love the idea of looking at income forecasts, I think that's way too big. And I love the idea of looking at fees and charges, that's way too big as well. I think picking an area and looking at everything around that area is good. And I think if we were going to do that, perhaps parking is an area that we could look at in terms of the income, the expenditure, and the way that, because I've just noticed that today when we've been doing the presentations, there have been quite a few questions about that, and also I've noticed that it's something that I'm sure we all get a lot of residents talking to us about. So I think maybe that might be something we could do a deep dive in terms of just checking out where we are with it. But as I said, that's just one thing, and I wouldn't push that necessarily over the other things like the residence card. If we're not going to do a residence card, then we don't need to discuss it. But if the administration are thinking of implementing one, then I think a project like that is quite large, and would really be very sensible for us to be checking it out before it just goes in the budget. So I think maybe it would be good if there was anything else that anyone thought that we should be considering. Although we're not going to be able to consider everything, it would be helpful to have that full list of things to choose from if anyone else has got any ideas now.
Councillor Beasley.
Thank you, Chairman. Just very briefly to build on that, perhaps we could adopt something not dissimilar to what I introduced to audit and governance a long time ago, which was around circulating the members of this committee, this board rather, and asking them for suggestions to be considered. That's not to lengthen the list, but I think if it was possible for Lindsay Marshall to put out something to members of this board, asking them to do that, but to explain that it will be the working group that decides which ones there is sufficient time and resource to examine. And it may be that some of the 5 that are on here make the cut, and it may be that others, such as the one suggested by Councillor Northover, make the cut. And if we do it that way, then the working group can decide at its first meeting which ones are in and which ones are out, and then those are the ones we can concentrate and do a proper job on. But what we don't want to do is to try and be so thinly spread that we don't do a proper job on any of them. So I think that's probably the right way forward. I would also suggest, if I may, Chairman, that there will be a further piece in the recommendations, which is how we can undertake this process with improvements next time, in a year's time, because I suspect that some things will come out of this in the way that we do it that would benefit from changes. They might be quite minor, that will be seen as improvements for the following year and the year after that. And finally, Chairman, could we be circulated with our giving us the opportunity to give our availability, because I'm sure we all want to play a full part in this, but we can only do it if we're available. So we need to get on with that bit first, I think, so that we've got the dates in our diaries and we can make sure we're there, assuming they're all online meetings.
Do we know what the dates are likely to be? Lindsay? Yeah.
Yeah, Chair, if I just address the issue of the dates are dependent on which officers are needed to support the working group, and we can't isolate who they will be until we know which area you want to look into. So therein there lies part of the issue. I did mean to mention earlier that at Appendix 2 to the report, there is the committee breakdown, if that assists you again, so that you can understand which areas report in. I agree with Councillor Beasley in terms of not spreading yourselves too thin, and I did want to highlight to you that the list within the report is very much a list of early examples that were provided by officers that might be suitable. It is not a list for you to as of proposals for you, and I know that as chair you surveyed your members in the summer for suggestions for this work, and hopefully this has been in the mind of the committee for a little while, and so very much member driven ideas is what we're looking for. Please do not feel that you need to address everything on the list. That would be far too much. 1 or 2 areas would be enough, I would suggest. And I agree with Councillor Beasley's comments about refining the process. This is the first year that we've done it this way, and it would be brilliant to reflect and tweak the process. So certainly that will be the aim all round. In terms of moving forward, we can put out a form to the working group members, well, the whole committee. You can put forward your suggestions. We would need to turn that around very rapidly for the working group to determine what they want to look at. We can't set any dates, as I said, until we know which areas you want to look at, because director diaries, as member diaries are very full. So we're in a bit of a catch-22 in terms of moving it forward. If the board can in any way form a conclusion on any areas that they feel they want to focus on, that would be very helpful. Otherwise we can go that way around. But I think that I should also stress that there will be a limit, I think, of 2 working group meetings for this working group, because there are 4 concurrent working groups taking place all within the month of October. So that's 8 working group meetings being supported across that time. So I think in terms of resources, it will be hard to fit in any more than 2 meetings. So I'm sorry if that doesn't help you draw any conclusions, but I hope that gives you an idea of how we're approaching this.
Just to, so if we've got this extra thing for the working group to do, to pick out, if you're going to send out to the committee members, ask them what they think, you're going to bring that to the working group to decide what it is we're going to look into. Surely that can be an extra meeting, because we don't need officer support except for one person to be helping us with what we're deciding, because we won't need any details, we won't be doing any deep dives in that one session. So surely that should be a short initial meeting before the 2 meetings actually start.
Lindsay?
We can certainly endeavour to accommodate that. I mean, we will of course endeavour to support in any way we can. I do have to stress that resources are limited, so I can't guarantee availability to support all those meetings. But I'm sure that the work group could itself meet virtually and feed back as well to us if needed. So I
Councillor Rice?
Hello. Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest, is that the working group could just arrange an informal meeting by themselves. Anybody that's got any suggestions can email it in, but they could organise that meeting within a few days. That's the sort of turnover that we're looking for, isn't it, Lindsay? Like, it needs to be very quick so that then we can get the directors slot in their diaries for sort of a couple of weeks' time.
Councillor Northover?
I was just going to say, because I can see Lindsay like looking worried, and just because I'm on the working group that we've got for the environment ONS, and it was more than a week ago, I think, we agreed it in the meeting, and we're already some way into the process, having done the scoping and stuff. And I think, it could be just an idea just to go for it and pick 2 things, because there's quite a lot to do even before the first meeting anyway. And I think we're the last one, so maybe I might encourage that.
Councillor Walters?
Yeah, just reading between the lines of what officers have recommended here, I think they're kind of begging us to choose it sooner rather than later. So I think, rather than being a bit wishy-washy and saying, let's send out an email, get some responses, a week later they could meet for the first one, decide what that might be. Why don't we just decide upon 2 topics tonight within one directorship each? Parking seems to be one. I reckon everyone probably agrees on that one. And the residence card seemed to be another one. That seemed to be a bit more up in the air, but yeah, 2 easy ones within one directorship. I think go ahead with that, rather than torturing the poor officers in terms of leaving it as long as possible.
Okay, any other views on that, members? Councillor Salmon?
I was going to say something broadly similar, and I agree quite strongly that we should try and decide tonight so that the officers can go away and get on. I think it would be lovely if we had the luxury of time to spend more time thinking about this and really being really sure we were getting exactly the most, the exactly right things. But we've got the time we've got, and surely picking something now and then moving on with it and getting it done is better than ending up with not getting anything done.
Councillor Aikenhead?
Assuming that what Councillor Walters was saying there was a proposal, I will second it.
Okay, I don't think we did need to discuss that anymore then.
Okay, I'll do it officially. I propose that we suggest that the working group focuses on parking charges and the residence card. Yeah, just put parking rather than parking charges then in that case.
Okay, members, that's been proposed and seconded. All those in favour? Those against? Abstentions? Just the one. Okay, that one's carried then, so that's the decision.
Second.
Councillor Rice?
Yes, I was just on the parking. It's a very broad conversation, so I just thought it may be useful to get maybe Glyn to come in about sort of clarification that he needs on what exactly we're all wanting to know about parking in preparation for that first meeting. Your microphone isn't on.
Yeah, what's been suggested is that at the first meeting, the working group can narrow it down specifically into which officers they wish to engage with. Yeah, Lindsay, come on.
Thank you for giving some direction there. Just to confirm then how we'll move the process along, I will circulate a key lines of inquiry document that members of the working group can contribute to. That just gives you a few more days to reflect on any specific data information that you would want brought forward under those two topics that you've identified. In the absence of any further direction from members, officers will just bring forward to you their current workings, which will be live in terms of how they're developing for the 25-26 budget, and they will work those through and share those with members, and then there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions and delve deeper. So really, the more that you want to add in terms of specific data and information, the more officers can respond to that direction. But we'll get that moving after this meeting and in the next few days.
Okay, thank you. Notwithstanding that agreement, I think, if anybody's got a burning issue that they think needs to be addressed, that they should raise it with the working group for sure. But at least we've got a starting position, so should be able to get on with it. That's good. Okay, I think we've probably come to the end of that debate then. So we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the work plan. Okay, the work plan is attached. Sorry. Sorry? Oh my goodness, I missed one. Yeah, sorry. It's obviously getting late. Sorry, Lindsay. I nearly stole your moment. Overview and scrutiny annual report. It's report written by Lindsay. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. It is getting late, and this report has been through all the ONS committees and is going on to council, so I won't labour the point or give an introduction. I'm going to assume that it's been read. I will just highlight recommendation 2, which is referencing the structure of the overview and scrutiny committees. This is obviously just a very small part of overview and scrutiny activity, so by no means should overshadow everything else within the report, but I want to make sure there's clarity around this for you, particularly with some comments that were raised throughout the meeting tonight. So at figure 1A and 1B, you will see the current ONS structure and a proposed ONS committee structure. Just to be clear, the ONS committees in BCP Council, there was a decision by the Council that those would align to the portfolio areas within the Cabinet, because fundamentally your powers to hold decision makers to account go up to the highest line of accountability, which is the Cabinet. Following the leadership changes in the Cabinet, there were some changes to how those portfolios were expressed, how they were named, the remits within them. And there was an addition of a portfolio. So the figure 1B has, if you studied the difference, you'll see some different wording. And in particular, there are some areas of red text under the Environment and Place Committee, which are suggested areas of remit that previously sat or currently sit under the ONS board. And it is suggested that those move to the Environment and Place Committee. because those are now all gathered under one portfolio. So that's just to make the lines of accountability clearer. The Environment and Place Committee have said they are content with that proposal. That will move forward with this annual report to council to decide. It's a minor change. That is the only main change to the remits of the ONS committees. And if you want to make any comment on that tonight, I would suggest that you do. But beyond that, I'm very happy to answer any questions around the annual report, but I think it is all set out clearly, and it's there for members to have a really good awareness of what's happening in overview and scrutiny, what is suggested for any areas for improvement to ensure it remains fit for purpose, and to make any comment that you might want to.
Okay, members? Anybody got any points they'd like to raise with Lindsay? It would appear not. Okay, I do have one issue I wish to raise, and that is the report talks about the parity of strategic importance for ONS, its status within the council. I'm not sure that we're really there yet with ONS. I'm also not sure we're there yet with the independence required for overview of scrutiny either. And there have been some examples this year which provide evidence to the lack of independence that we have. I won't go into detail on it now, but I do have some concern about the view of the value of this committee and what it can do, and in particular its need to be independent of the administration. So I just wanted to raise that, Lindsay, as just a view that I formed over the last few months. And as you'll be well aware of the issues that I'm talking about, I suspect. So it's not all rosy, as you might read from this report. It looks pretty sound, doesn't it? But I think there are some issues that need to be addressed. So with that, unless anybody wants me to expand on that, I think I'll leave it there. Yes, Councillor Walters.
Could you expand on where we've been impacted by the administration, please?
Yeah, I mean, we had one agenda, for example, where 3 items were removed from our agenda on the instructions of the monitoring officer without any discussion or debate with me as the chairman of the council, of this committee. It was just something that was imposed on us, and there was no debate. It was just a decision made by the administration, and I had to basically accept it.
Was that the monitoring officer or the administration?
It was the monitoring officer's instruction.
Are you able to tell us what those items were?
Yes. One was a paper that was being prepared for overview and scrutiny on pay and reward. One was on commercial operations on the seafront, and the other one was the seafront revised strategy.
And what you may have said this, they were removed, and was there no explanation as to why they were taken off? What was the justification? If that, I'd like to understand this.
Yeah, an explanation was given with regard to pay and reward. It was stated that pay and reward was in the process of being negotiated with the unions, and therefore it was not an appropriate time for overview and scrutiny to examine that particular subject. With regard to the commercial operations on the seafront, it was deemed to be more of an audit and governance issue than overview and scrutiny. And the seafront strategy, I believe it was because there was a relationship between those 2 papers on the seafront. Yeah, but that was the explanation that was given at the time. But as I said, the decision was made before there was any debate or explanation. So as you can imagine, and that's behind the comment that I made. I would also say that, with the recent calling, I did request, because we had not had an opportunity to overview scrutinise in the pay and reward in particular. I did ask if the cabinet that paper that was brought forward at very, very short notice could be delayed. That meeting could be delayed in order that the overview and scrutiny could scrutinise it. And that was not, I would say not permitted, but it was not agreed at the time, presumably because of time constraints that the cabinet had. But so I did write an ask, and I actually asked through Democratic Services initially. I then wrote an ask through the leader of the council, who again rejected that request. So, you know, that in particular, pay and reward was an issue that had not been subjected to the overview and scrutiny process, and although we had tried to put it on the agenda, it was actually removed. So that's the background to it. Councillor Rice, thank you.
Yeah, well, from a practical point of view, it would be good to hear more about sort of if there was any other issues that you were concerned about. Sending them in an email to all of us is probably would be quite a useful thing to know about. And then another thing, like when these issues arise, I suppose what you a possibility would be to share these concerns with the whole committee, and then if the whole committee are very concerned at the time as well, it just sort of it's maybe a useful step. I don't know. Thank you.
Yes, you're probably right, Councillor Rice. Although some of the issues I did attempt to raise by cabinet, but you know, I think to a point I understood one or two of the reasons that were given retrospectively, and I had a degree of understanding and sympathy for the argument. But the fact is that the decisions were made before that debate, which I felt was wrong. But anyway, there we are. Yes.
Yeah, another item which I think sort of relates to some of the things that you've talked about. I've been rather surprised to find myself as the only BCP member at the regional scrutiny board for the last couple of meetings. I find it very useful, and the next one's got a couple of items on the agenda. One of them I asked for, and I think it's been asked for other people as well, is making scrutiny independent of the political process, because there was some concern about that, and there was a concern that was raised earlier this year that sort of rather brought it to a head in my mind. But that is going to be dealt with at the next regional meeting, which is the 2nd of December. And the other issue which is on the agenda for that day, and is obviously something that we're interested in, is the whole send situation and scrutinising that. But I do think it's useful if more members attended that. I think what they're going into in the next meeting is best practice that, you know, various authorities around the southwest have found. But I think it would be useful to members to do that, and I think Lindsay will know a bit about it, because I think she's in the officers group that are involved in that as well.
Councillor Cox, thank you.
Thank you. I have to say, I was very concerned with what you just said about interference in the independence of this committee, because it's wholly untrue, and you've made the accusation, and you haven't backed it up, because what you have said is actually that the monitoring officers asked for 3 things to be changed. It's not the administration. You know, if anything, the administration have got bent over backwards to make sure that this committee is as independent as possible, and certainly from my perspective, if there are any recommendations, we look at them very carefully, very seriously. You know, I appreciate that, you know, we had an issue on pay and reward, but you know, there's I think that's a fairly serious accusation you make, and I do feel as though, you know, you need to back it up, and you need to come and talk to the administration if you've got a problem, because I don't think that is fair, to be honest. And if you are going to write to the committee, I think you should copy in the cabinet to talk about it, because we would want to hear that.
Yeah, thank you. There was an engagement with the leader of the council at the time over these issues. That's all I'll say on the matter at the moment, but maybe my terminology is not appropriate by saying the administration. I include officers in the administration, and that's why I use that expression. But in this case, it was a monitoring officer's decision. I'm not sure who was involved behind the scenes in that decision. That it was delivered to me, so
I can assure you, the monitoring officer is very independent and doesn't always doesn't always make decisions that we think are right. But wholly and utterly respect her independence, and I think we're very lucky to have our monitoring officer at the moment. So.
I think in mitigation, I do understand, of course, the difficult position monitoring officers in sometimes with the need to protect the interests of the council. And these matters are difficult. Sometimes you have to make difficult decisions in a very short time, and that was probably one of those circumstances. But nevertheless, my concern is one of independence for overview and scrutiny, which it should have, and I felt that was encroached upon. And people have asked me for the reasons tonight, and I just see no reason why I shouldn't let them know what those reasons are. And it does relate to this report, how overview and scrutiny is performing, and whether it's reaching its objectives, and how it's regarded generally within the council. So unless Lindsay would like to comment any further on what I've said, maybe you do, Lindsay, but if not, I think we'll leave it there. No,
No, Chair, I would only comment to say that I know that there has been a great deal of correspondence between you, and I know that the issues that you've cited are all quite separate issues, so I think it wouldn't be appropriate for me to give any view on that, and I would be very mindful of not conflating the issues all into one, because they all relate to separate circumstances. So in my sense as a scrutiny officer, I'm not prepared to offer any further view to the committee on that at this stage, but it's very useful to hear your views, and indeed those of the committee and the portfolio holder. So I'll certainly take those away. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. So where are we then? Any other questions or comments on the report? No. Okay.
I was just looking at the a lovely table that you have, which is really helpful, that relates all the different scrutiny boards to the different portfolios, and it's nicely updated for the changes in the cabinet. I wondered, is there an equivalent plan like this that shows how the overview and scrutiny committees crossover with the structure of the council and the officers, or perhaps one that relates the portfolios to the officers? Because if there was, that would be a really useful thing, and I think we might have found it even quite useful earlier on in this meeting. And if there isn't one, I wonder if we could make one, because it would be really helpful.
Yeah, through you, Chair. That's an excellent question, Councillor Aikenhead, and one I was intending to raise earlier, if appropriate. You won't be surprised to know that it's a very complicated arrangement when you try to line the directorates of the council up with the portfolios and the overview and scrutiny committees, because none of them do line up neatly together. Nevertheless, they all do link together. We do tend to maintain a sort of a working copy of an aid that we use, and I can certainly bring that up to date and share it with the committee to assist you. It's not, unfortunately, something that's easy to capture on one page, because it is quite complex, and obviously there are generally quite a lot of changes within the council and the directorates, and little movement. So it's often quite a live document, but we will do that and assist you in any way we can.
Thank you very much. That will be really helpful.
Okay, so shall we now go on to agenda item 9, the work plan? Thank you for that, Lindsay. Sorry. Oh, sorry, Claire, did you want to come in on that last debate?
Yes, please. Just a little suggestion following on from what Lindsay said about this, live document is perhaps not that, if you email it, I think we get sort of a copy, which is a moment in time. What Nigel Stannard did for us in audit and governance is he set up a Teams channel, and then in that folder there were documents that the committee have access to, and then if you were to do it that way, we would always have access to the latest version of that document, because you mentioned that it changes quite regularly. So for your consideration.
That sounds like a good idea. So that's something we could do, Lindsay?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll take that forward. That's a great suggestion. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so we will move on to the work plan, agenda item 9 then. Members, you've all read the report. There are some changes that have to be made to that, incidentally. As usual, it's a moving feast for various reasons. For example, the transport plan will no longer be ours because it will move into environment. Yeah, we can. Yeah, our next meeting is on the 21st of October. Yeah, so quite an important paper coming through on investment and development direction and the regeneration programme. So it's the first time that we really get to hear about what the in-house regeneration team been up to, and the transfer of Future Places team to there, so we can see what they've been up to. I think it's probably been about a year now, I think, since they moved in. The transformation and centralised handling of complaints. I'm not actually sure where we are with that one. Claire, can you just give us a clue?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So that was suggested a while ago, but at the moment we haven't had any further scoping done to that. However, so I think it's not going to be possible to bring that to the October meeting, but we're having a meeting set up with the director to look into that further. But if any members in the meantime have anything they want to input into the Chloe document for that, the key lines of inquiry, that would be really helpful, so that we can start preparing what the committee actually want to hear on that one.
Thank you. The next one was performance of the council, which was to be an informal investigation, like the Blue Badge report that we did earlier in the year, just to chat with some of the directors and just to see how performance is managed within each directorate and how it links to the corporate plan, etc. We're getting a bit short on time for that one. I'm a bit doubtful as to whether that will come forward by October. I did ask for some volunteers. I didn't get any volunteers to join me on that one, but it may be possible to produce something by October. I'm not quite sure on that one, so I'll defer on that for a minute. But the Blue Badges report is the next item. So there are definitely two substantive items for the next meeting. So it's a regeneration and a follow-up on the Blue Badge report that we did earlier on. So at the moment, that's probably going to be it. Councillor Waters.
Sorry, it's kind of unrelated to what you were saying, but a lot of what we've talked about tonight is entirely reliant on things like the budget the government's announcing shortly, such as the dedicated schools grant and a bunch of other stuff. Is it worth not doing it, in October when the budget's being launched, but having some kind of review to see how the budget is going to affect the changes, affect the council and our budgeting and that sort of things? I think that's probably more of a November, December type thing. I don't want to be the one that proposes new ideas whilst we're in this meeting, but if everyone thinks that's probably something that we should look at, I'd be more than happy to put something online via email, just saying what our concerns could be to everyone.
Well, we do. Our meeting on the 18th is dedicated to budget.
As in the government's budget?
Well, it's ours, and obviously if that's influenced by government policy, then I can see us encompassing some of that in that debate, certainly on that meeting. So
I would imagine.
Okay.
Absolutely. So I think that whole meeting is dedicated to budget issues. So I think it's going to be there.
Cool.
Oliver. Okay, thank you. I think that's all I've got to say on next meeting. Anything else from you, Claire, on that?
Chair, I just wanted to mention also the briefing workshops that have been suggested. One to hear from the local bids, and the other one was to sorry, just remind me of what it's called because I always forget the name of it.
ERP.
The ERP system, to have a demonstration of that. So I'll be in touch hopefully fairly soon with dates to put in the diary for both of those. Thank you.
Yeah, again, the ERP system has been in operation for quite some time now. It was a very expensive piece of work, I understand. I'm not quite sure how much it cost, but quite a bit. So it's a lot been mentioned about it. I think it'd be useful if we all saw what it does and how useful we think it's going to be. Councillor Beasley.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to remind you, not sure whether it was in this context or not, or whether it was a working group around online reporting that we spoke about earlier on. Just seems to me this is the only item I can capture that under.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I was remiss in not actually recording an action, because when you raised it, I thought probably the first step with that is to have a discussion with Matty Rousap, who's heading up that area, to see what we can do in terms of a report, whether we do an investigation ourselves or whatever. But it certainly hasn't gone. And I should really put it, and I would ask retrospectively if we can put it on our action list to make sure it doesn't get lost and we do action it. And the action will be on me to make sure that it's initiated. And I welcome your offer to assist with that, actually.
Well, Chairman, if I can just respond to that, but what I don't think we need is an officer report written by the service, which obviously is not going to highlight any deficits. That's why I think it's probably more appropriate through some other mechanism that isn't live and that isn't public, in order that can then be fed back to the board later on, because I think it will just it'll fall into the usual local government trap if we're not careful, and we'll achieve very little out of it.
Okay, thank you. So members, any more? Is that it? All done? Okay, it's a bit late, isn't it? It's been a long evening. Thanks everyone, everybody. Thanks for Democratic Services teams, and thanks for everybody online too. So with that, I'll close the meeting.